Bleach. Studying medicine can't save the spirit world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyright or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301. Desperate sword drawing. Drawing the sword. Senju Cheng's sword drawing action was not quick, and it was not the kind of sword drawing and slashing posture at all. Instead, the whole process was so slow that the onlookers could see every detail clearly. Holding the scabbard in one hand and the handle in the other, he slowly drew out the blade with a seemingly ordinary action. However, in the eyes of Mantis Tapsu, it seemed that as the blade left the scabbard, some kind of blood-red liquid was gushing out of the scabbard frantically. That seemed very unreal, so unreal that Mantis Tapsu seemed to be drawing the sword in front of him in the blink of an eye, and it seemed real, so real that Mantis Tapsu could faintly smell a breath of despair. Mantis Tapsu stared with eyes wide open, and his four sharp forelimbs seemed to be trembling and shaking faintly as he muttered, "What?" This feeling of despair. The next moment, Mantis Hollow saw that the look in Senju Cheng's eyes had changed. The originally calm and playful look had completely turned into a dead silence, as if there was a sea of blood without any ripples. At the same time, in the Unohana courtyard of the 4th Division of the Seireitei, Unohana Retsu sat in the living room, facing Mori and Dashia, with his eyes slightly lowered, and slowly pulled out his zanpakutō in his hand, wiping it carefully. The gentle movement was as if he was wiping the skin of a loved one, until the entire zanpakutō blade was not stained with a trace of dust, and Unohana Retsu put the zanpakutō back into the sheath. And Unohana Retsu then raised his eyes to look at Mori and Uzuchi, revealing a bit of sigh and reminiscence. "Makoto, you always say that your kendo talent is average. Even the kendo taught in the Mao Spiritual Academy is not as good as your peers, but the instinct you hide is terrifying. In the repeated fights, although you have not fully mastered the kendo skills, your most important instinct has completely learned how to fight perfectly with the maximum efficiency. Really, I didn't realize this at the beginning, and I thought you were a god of death who purely loved kendo and medicine. Obviously, you are the most terrifying beast in the Seireitei." Having said this, Unohana Retsu paused, stroking his zanpakutō, and said with a bit more anticipation in his tone, "When will you be able to fully reveal your instincts and fight the teacher mercilessly? That will be the highest pleasure that is unimaginable, right? What have you been enduring? Don't you want to really hurt the teacher? But your instinct has already stacked the teacher countless times." Unohana Retsu's mouth slightly curved, one hand inadvertently pressed his chest, and his mind recalled the bloody but also pleasant scenes. For more than 50 years, perhaps, Unohana Retsu did not have the idea of teaching Senju Cheng kendo at the beginning, and in front of the person he cherished the most, Unohana Retsu gradually couldn't suppress a certain instinct. However, as time went on, Unohana Retsu gradually became obsessed with fighting with Senju Cheng. When Senju Cheng remained rational, Senju Cheng was undoubtedly at an absolute disadvantage. However, after Senju Cheng lost most of his rationality in the fight to a certain extent, his body controlled by instinct hurt Unohana Retsu again and again. The chest was pierced again and again, and the warm liquid spurted out, always covering the entire chest. If it weren't for the fact that Makoto Senju was in an instinctive state of losing his rationality, Unohana Retsu couldn't help but wonder if Makoto Senju was deliberately aiming at the same position every time. As the number of fights continued to increase, Unohana Retsu could feel more and more clearly that Makoto Senju's instincts were becoming more and more terrifying, and in the end he was almost evenly matched with Unohana Retsu, who had not released his zanpakutō. Therefore, it was not only Makoto Senju who took regular sick leave almost every month in the 4th Division, but Unohana Retsu also stayed at home and rarely paid attention to the 4th Division's team affairs. This might be the reason why he was bleeding almost half of the time every month. Counting it up, this time is almost the time that Makoto used to fight every month. Makoto probably hasn't even realized it yet. His body may have gotten used to this interval of releasing instincts. If he draws his sword at this time, Hukomundo. As Senju Cheng subconsciously chose to draw his sword under some impulse, the whole person seemed to enter a state of excitement, bloodthirstiness and abnormal calmness. The reason for holding the sword. The purpose of holding the sword. That is naturally to kill the things in front of him and enjoy the fight to his heart's content. Rationality is not completely lost, but Senju Cheng inexplicably felt that there is no need to think at the moment of drawing the sword. It is obviously just a matter of following instinct. Why should I think about it deliberately? It's like, No human has ever deliberately thought about whether the next breath of the body is necessary and reasonable. At this moment, the mantis big hollow standing in front of Senju Cheng seemed to feel a kind of bloody despair that almost completely surrounded himself, entangled himself and dragged him to hell. Finally, it was as if some invisible pressure had broken through the critical point of the mantis big hollow's will. With bloodshot eyes, the mantis big hollow did not turn around and flee, but roared hysterically and pounced on Senju Cheng. What a joke! Fighting in despair, this is the true meaning of fighting. The mantis hollow laughed wildly in despair, and the spiritual pressure it burst out faintly increased again, almost reaching the critical point of touching the higher level vasto-level hollow. The four sharp forelimbs, under the huge amount of spiritual pressure, burst out a kind of brilliant light, and slashed towards Senju Cheng from different angles with the momentum of tearing everything apart. Swish, swish, swish in the dark night, the four sickle-shaped giant sharp forelimbs were almost like four streams of light that instantly swallowed Senju Cheng, and set off four terrifying air waves that vented in all directions. Boom! At the same time, four huge gullies were split open in the sand sea in four different directions behind Senju Cheng, and a huge amount of white sand rushed into the sky like a waterfall against the current. And in the midst of the countless sands rushing into the sky, the movements between Mantis Daxu and Senju Cheng seemed to be completely frozen. The next moment, just as the huge amount of white sand that was rushing against the current reached its highest point and fell again like a rainstorm, the four sharp forelimbs of Mantis Daxu slowly slid down from the roots and fell onto the desert. Chapter 302. Mantis-like suicide. The blood-red eyes of the mantis hollow dimmed at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. However, even so, the mantis hollow seemed to feel some kind of satisfaction, and moved his mouth slightly, and spoke. A wonderful swing of the knife, a suffocating blade of despair. What is the name of this knife? Name? Senju Cheng raised his eyes slightly, and his eyes, which were originally as dead as a sea of blood, had a few more waves, and he answered subconsciously. It's just an ordinary swing. Do I need to give it an additional name? Mantis hollow. As Senju Cheng's voice fell, the mantis hollow, with his eyes wide open, seemed unwilling and angry, and wanted to say something, but the mask on his face was instantly shattered, and his body split straight from it, and then dispersed into countless spirit particles. This scene also made the white leopard hollow, who was watching from afar, completely stunned, not only because the mantis hollow was killed in such a desperate and powerless way, but more importantly, the mantis hollow's body quickly dissipated into spirit particles. You know, in the fight between hollows, the bodies left by the dead hollows will not be scattered directly. This situation can only mean that Senju Cheng's identity is Death God. However, as the white leopard hollow spoke, a voice with a bit of helplessness sounded behind the white leopard hollow at the same time. Oh, sorry, my body's reaction seems to be a bit too extreme. I accidentally killed the opponent and exposed myself. The white leopard hollow turned his head stiffly and looked behind him. He saw that Senju Cheng had stood behind him leisurely, and the tip of the zanpakutō in his hand was faintly aimed at his tail. Senju Cheng's eyes curved, and he spoke in a gentle and sincere tone. You'll keep the secret. Right. If you agree, as long as you answer a few of my questions truthfully, I will let you go with gratitude. The white leopard hollow slowly turned around, avoiding pointing his most vulnerable tail at the terrible zanpakutō, and faintly took a fighting posture and said, Do you think I will believe such ridiculous words? Death God. Whether I answer or not, you will never let me go. How could that be? Senju Cheng said with a somewhat aggrieved and helpless tone. You can always believe my promise, and it was not me who took the initiative just now. I stated at the beginning that I was just passing by and wanted to ask a few questions. Doesn't this prove that I am a kind death god? Kind death god. Although Daxu didn't know how to refute Senju Cheng's words, his intuition told him that the death god in front of him was definitely talking nonsense. The fate of the mantis Daxu undoubtedly confirmed this. Senju Cheng looked at Daxu, who was still extremely vigilant and ready to fight at any time, and spoke in a gentle tone. How about this? I'll tell you my name and the number of the Shinigami division I belong to. If I've deceived you in any way, you can complain to me afterwards. That's enough to prove my sincerity, right? Upon hearing this, the white leopard hollow's expression eased a little. After all, Senju Cheng's words seemed quite sincere and genuine, and the way he took the initiative to expose his information was enough to prove some of its credibility. Senju Cheng noticed the intention in the white leopard hollow's eyes, and secretly sighed that the IQ development of the Achuka's level hollows was not completely perfect. Complain. Even under the premise that how to ensure that he could leave alive was a question, complaining was undoubtedly ridiculous, not to mention that as a hollow, would he go to the Seireitei to complain about Senju Makoto's fraud? However, in order to appease the White Leopard Hollow, Senju Makoto was ready to report the name of Captain of the 5th Division, Aiden Sosok. Although the possibility of the White Leopard Hollow being able to complain was very small, it could further avoid risks and give Captain Aiden some eye drops. However, just when Senju Cheng was about to speak, Baibaho Daxu finally realized something was wrong and interrupted him. Wait, something is not right, what's wrong? Senju Cheng couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Just when he thought Baibaho Daxu realized that the protection of complaints was a castle in the air, Baibaho Daxu spoke. The more I know, the less likely you'll let me leave, right? How could that be? You can trust me completely. I have always treated all of you equally, and don't you have any better choice? Senju Cheng said in a gentle and kind tone. The last reminder made Baibaho Daxu realized that he really had no better choice. In the face of the absolute level gap, answering will actually give you a chance to survive. Otherwise, Mantis Daxu has already explained the corresponding fate. Then, Baibaho Daxu gritted his teeth and spoke. Ask. Senju Cheng asked with a smile on his face that became more kind. I want to know the whereabouts of the vast hollow named Eleventh Bank. Eleventh Bank. The expression of the White Leopard Hollow seemed a little strange. Suddenly, Senju Makoto's smile became more intense, knowing that there was probably a chance. The White Leopard Hollow continued. I came here to challenge Eleventh Bank head-on, but was stopped. What do you mean? Senju Makoto was stunned. The White Leopard Hollow continued. The one who really knew the exact location of Eleventh Bank was Cheng-ge, but he was killed by you just now. Senju Makoto. Wait, are you saying that it was Cheng-ge who accidentally bumped into my blade and committed suicide just now? Senju Makoto asked in surprise. Accidentally bumped into? Committed suicide. The White Leopard Hollow felt insulted by this statement, but still nodded. For a moment, Senju Makoto couldn't help but feel a little speechless. Cheng-ge. This name is the 50th Espada in the original trajectory, an Seireitei with an inglorious but brilliant record. He actually committed suicide by hitting his own sword like this. Isn't that too careless? Of course, Senju Makoto also realized that he was also somewhat at fault. He forgot to ask the name of the Mantis Hollow in advance, otherwise he would definitely try to stop Noitra's praying mantis blocking a chariot style of suicide. Thinking of this, Senju Makoto's eyes fell on the White Leopard Hollow in front of him again, and asked with a smile. So what's your name? The White Leopard Hollow couldn't hide his vigilance and uttered a name. Grimjao Jakek. Chapter 303. The Void Encirclement. Grimjao Jakek. The 6th of the original 10 Espadas, and after becoming an Seireitei and fighting Ichigo Kurosaki, he quickly became an Seireitei of the level of Vast Held. Instantly, Senju Makoto's eyes became a little kinder when he looked at Grimjao. Although Grimjao is not a vast held level hollow yet, he undoubtedly has the corresponding potential. However, Senju Makoto's suddenly kinder expression undoubtedly represents a dangerous signal in Grimjao's eyes. The next moment, almost instinctively, Grimjao, who looked almost like a leopard, instantly turned into a residual image and disappeared from the spot, quickly sweeping away. However, just as Grimjao was about to disappear from Senju Makoto's sight in the blink of an eye, a large number of dead trees unique to Hukomundo emerged from all directions with Grimjao as the center, drowning Grimjao in it. Faced with this sudden situation, Grimjao opened his mouth and a powerful flash was fired without hesitation, trying to open a passage. But, after a few breaths, Grimjao's limbs were tied tightly by the dead wood, just like a lamb to be slaughtered, and he was directly hung upside down by the dead wood and carried back to Senju Makoto. Senju Makoto looked at Grimjao, who seemed to be humiliated, and said helplessly, "Why do you want to escape when you don't agree with me? This is a violation of the agreement." Grimjao gritted his teeth and said, "I have answered your question, and you're the one who violated the agreement." Senju Makoto raised his eyebrows and asked back, "When did I say there was only one question?" Obviously, when it comes to the art of speaking, Senju Makoto, who has been trained for a long time under the guidance of Unohana Retsu, is far from being comparable to Grimjao. In just a few words, even Grimjao felt as if he was in the wrong. "Death God, what do you want?" "I don't know the exact whereabouts of Eleventh Division," Grimjao said. Senju Cheng shook his head and replied. I have a way to confirm Nell's whereabouts, but I am more interested in you now. Grimjow was stunned at first, and then Leopard Tail subconsciously clamped his legs and asked. What do you mean? Senju Cheng reached out and patted Grimjow's head, and said bluntly. Pledge allegiance to me and follow me, how about it? Grimjow heard this, and his eyes showed a bit of shock and confusion. For Grimjow, who has been fighting alone in the cruel environment of Hutomundo until now, this is undoubtedly an extremely strange invitation. Then, Grimjow couldn't help but ask back. With your power, is there really a value for an Uchikage like me to follow? Of course, Senju Cheng answered without hesitation. I never underestimate the power of Uchikages, and I see that you have the potential to become Vastod, so Uchikage is definitely not your destination. Instantly, Grimjow's eyes clearly showed some hesitation, loyalty. This feeling was particularly unfamiliar to Grimjow, who was arrogant and pursued fair fighting. However, facing Senju Cheng's invitation, Grimjow did not dislike it, because the power possessed by Senju Cheng has proved that he is qualified to make this invitation, even though Senju Cheng is a death god. Then, Grimjow looked at Senju Cheng in front of him and said bluntly. What can I get by offering loyalty? How about making you stronger and even helping you become an Iron Saber in the near future? Senju Cheng replied. After hesitating for a moment, Grimjow spoke. Then, please tell me the name of the person I need to be loyal to. Senju Cheng's face showed a hint of smile, and with a wave of his hand, the deadwood that bound Grimjow instantly dissipated into spirit particles. Grimjow, who was hung upside down in the air, then fell to the ground and crawled in front of Senju Cheng. Senju Cheng thought for a moment and answered. Ashura-Yunchen, you should remember this name. Yes, Ashura-sama. Grimjow responded respectfully, but his somewhat arrogant head still did not completely lower. Senju Cheng did not care too much about this, and even gradually understood some of Asian Sussex style. Just like a soaring dragon, it would not specifically correct or even get angry because the crawling ants did not move in a standard way. The huge difference in the level of strength, either ignored or crushed to death, that's all. And for Senju Cheng, the threat that Grimjow could pose was too small. The reason why he deliberately recruited him, in addition to valuing his potential and value, was more of a whim. After all, Grimjow's white leopard appearance is still quite beautiful, and it is considered a rare type of high value among the Uchuka's level hollows. If Grimjow is loyal, Senju Cheng will give him a corresponding reward for his loyalty, and a little rudeness is not a big deal. If Grimjow tries to do something out of the ordinary, it is not difficult for Senju Cheng to kill an Uchuka's. In fact, from the beginning to the end, the only person that Senju Cheng is really afraid of in the entire Hutomundo is undoubtedly Aizen Sosok. Lord Ashura, how do you plan to find Neoduoda's Thank? Grimjow asked. It's very simple. Since Noitra knows the location of Nell, it is enough to show that Nell is actually not far from this location. When he said this, Senju Cheng's voice paused, his eyes moved slightly, and he looked in a certain direction. What's wrong? Lord Ashura? Grimjow asked. It seems that we have to slow down the search for Nell because some unexpected guests have appeared. As Senju Cheng finished speaking, a large area of spiritual pressure reactions appeared in all directions with Senju Cheng's position as the center. Hundreds of Uchikage hollows, thousands of Killian hollows, and the huge spiritual pressure reaction of Bailogen. Then, in less than a moment, the densely packed large number of hollows completely surrounded Senju Cheng's position. The huge Killians covered the battlefield like a black curtain, and the Uchikages of different sizes were like beasts ready to hunt. Then, Senju Cheng's eyes turned and fell on Bailogen, who was not far away from him, and he spoke calmly. Bailogen, are you welcoming me with such a big show? I have been waiting for you for quite a while, Ashura-Yunchen. As Bailogen read out this name, Senju Cheng narrowed his eyes and said. I don't remember ever telling you that name, Bailogen. Chapter 304. Terrifying spiritual pressure. Bailogen slowly stood up from the throne, and spoke with a thick black mist all over his body. I am the king of Hutomundo. Is there nothing in Hutomundo that can be hidden from me? Really? Senju Cheng answered calmly. But why do I hear hesitation, uneasiness, and fear in your tone? Bailogen, are you afraid of me? Afraid that I can ignore the corruptibility you have? As soon as these words came out, even Bailogen's skeleton-like spirit almost revealed a feeling of being exposed. Fear. That's right, as the king of Hutomundo, Bailogen is afraid of the power called corruption, and even more afraid of the existence of the world that can ignore corruption. Senju Cheng's existence has almost reached a point that Bailijin can't tolerate at all. He used all his forces, and even manipulated thousands of Jillians to join the encirclement, just to completely eliminate Senju Cheng. Bailijin held the giant axe with 5 fingers, and said in a gloomy voice, Seireitei, this kind of meaningless angry words will only make you pay the price of angering the king of Hukomundo faster. Now you have only 2 choices, either kneel down and submit to me, or rot and die here completely. However, as he encountered many big hollows in Hukomundo, Senju Cheng gradually understood the level of his combat power. A smile with a bit of contempt appeared on his lips. In the Hukomundo, which is full of loneliness and instinct, Senju Cheng's style is undoubtedly affected a little bit, and in Hukomundo, there are no rules in the Seireitei, and Senju Cheng does not need to pretend anything deliberately. As Senju Cheng's thoughts moved, the deadwood spread behind him, and in the blink of an eye, a deadwood throne was formed. Senju Cheng sat on the throne in front of Bailijin, who stood up, his body tilted slightly to one side, his elbow resting on the armrest, one hand supporting his chin. Surrounded by hundreds of Uchukas and thousands of Killians, Senju Cheng looked down at Bailijin with a calm gaze, and spoke slowly. In this big world, I will only be willing to be under one person and tolerate the other party's arbitrary conquest and demand, but that person will definitely not be a mere vast odd. After a pause, Senju Cheng's gentle eyes that had been maintained almost habitually for decades revealed a rare sharpness, and said contemptuously, Bailijin, what on earth made you want to make me kneel down and surrender to you? Such undisguised contemptuous words undoubtedly made Bailijin, the nominal king of Hukomundo, extremely angry. Looking at the empty eye sockets of Senju Cheng's skull, he could hardly suppress the strong killing intent. Seireitei, it seems that you haven't figured out the situation yet. You have been sleeping in the dead tree for a long time, and I'm afraid you don't understand what the great hollows that have turned into a group are. Yes, let alone you, I'm afraid even the Soul Society, which is the mortal enemy of the Hukomundo, has forgotten that kind of power, right? It has been thousands of years since there has been a power that explodes when countless hollows merge together. Seireitei, I will let you be completely annihilated under the most basic and terrifying power of countless great hollows. As Bailijin's voice fell, the hollow group encirclement centered on Senju Cheng opened its mouths one by one, and the hollows quickly began to condense. In an instant, Senju Cheng realized something. Just as the Shinigami can create a huge ghost barrier through mutual cooperation, hollows won't also have this ability. However, in the past concept of the Soul Society, the Killians were a group of disordered monsters with confused consciousness. The Uchukas were beasts that fought and killed each other, and the number of bastards was extremely rare. Furthermore, it is impossible for the hollows to learn the ghost do and release it in coordination under normal circumstances, similar to the Shinigami. However, the Hollow Flash, this is the most basic ability of the hollows, and it will not have the characteristics of mutual integration, right? At the moment when Senju Cheng reacted, it seemed that 10 twinkling stars were lit up in all directions with Senju Cheng as the center, just like adding the most beautiful embellishment to the dead night sky. However, the constantly twinkling starlight undoubtedly represents destructive power. The light is getting more and more urgent. In theory, the hollow flash of the Uchukas level is equivalent to the full-strength attack of the Shinigami at the ordinary captain level, that is thousands of hollow flashes, which undoubtedly represent the terrifying destructive power to the extreme. However, at this moment, in Bailijin's playful and happy eyes, Senju Cheng did not show fear, nor did he try to escape the encirclement. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the Uchukas beside him. Grim Zhao, aren't you going to run away? I can't run away. Grim Zhao answered in a low voice. If you pledge allegiance to Bailijin now, you might not have to be drowned by countless voids along with me, Senju Cheng said with a teasing tone. Don't compare me with those cowards who surrendered to Bailijin. Grim Zhao answered with a bit of arrogance. Senju Cheng asked somewhat unexpectedly. Don't you have a trace of fear? Grim Zhao answered in a calm voice, stating his position. Fear? Of course I do. But Master Ashura is still so calm, I don't think Master Ashura will be so easily dealt with. That's a pretty correct answer, then stand firm next. As Senju Cheng's voice fell, thousands of terrifying voids were like red torrents of destruction, merging with each other and drowning towards Senju Cheng. In the light that almost dyed Hukomundo red, a terrifying spiritual pressure fluctuation suddenly erupted. It seemed that the spiritual pressure strength was completely superior to that of the vast old-level Great Hollow. Even the spiritual pressure that erupted at that moment was completely beyond the imagination of Bailijin, the king of Hukomundo. The source of the terrifying spiritual pressure fluctuation was undoubtedly Makoto Senju, who was sitting on the deadwood throne. At this moment, the cloak on Makoto Senju that was originally used to cover the spiritual pressure fluctuation was almost directly torn to pieces. Grim Zhao, who was closest to Makoto Senju, knelt unconsciously on the desert under the terrifying spiritual pressure. Under the spiritual pressure, the air seemed to be distorted, the desert was trembling, and everything seemed to surrender. Chapter 305. Let Yuko Mundo calm down. Long before Makoto Senju became the vice captain of the 4th Division, the speed at which Makoto Senju accumulated spiritual power through the forest seat had reached nearly 6 carts a year. In other words, the spiritual power that Makoto Senju steadily increased every year more than 50 years ago was already close to the level of 6 carts of fists. Not to mention the subsequent 50 years, as the vice captain of the 4th Division, Makoto Senju treated so many Shinigami with spiritual power above the rank of chief officer, and even Makoto Senju could hardly measure this number. Makoto Senju was quite clear that the entire Seireitei was almost densely packed with forest seeds integrated into different spirits as long as he could sense it a little. So in the Seireitei, except for some very few people, Makoto Senju has undoubtedly done this in the true sense. Therefore, in the end, even Senju Makoto could hardly calculate how terrifying the spiritual power that increased every year had reached, especially after the ultimate spiritual body was completed to a certain extent. Senju Makoto had to turn to accumulating spiritual power, and he kept suppressing himself, fearing that the extraordinary spiritual pressure would be leaked. For this reason, Senju Makoto almost sealed a huge amount of spiritual power in the ultimate spiritual body in a way similar to forced sealing. However, even though Senju Makoto used all kinds of methods, in recent years, the spiritual pressure that was accidentally leaked has reached the level of ordinary captains. At this moment, the first time in the true sense that the spiritual pressure was released without suppression, it made Senju Makoto's eyes more blurred with a bit of release. Very comfortable, really comfortable. Senju Makoto moaned softly, and when he raised his eyes, the terrifying spiritual pressure that burst out rushed up to the sky, almost like a materialized barrier, blocking the countless virtual flashes that came suddenly. No, a more accurate way to put it is to say that it is similar to the crushing of dimensions. The power of those hollow flashes is terrible, but even if they continue to merge with each other, the power is raised to a terrifying level. However, it is difficult to conceal their own spiritual pressure density, which is completely different from Senju Makoto's spiritual pressure density. It is just like how no matter how much cotton is piled up, it cannot crush a steel wall. However, this scene, whether it is seen in the eyes of those Cheng-ge or in the eyes of Bailijin, is undoubtedly beyond their understanding. How is it possible? The hollow flash was blocked. Is this a god? However, compared with the shock of those great hollows, Senju Makoto, who was sitting on the deadwood throne, raised his eyes slightly and looked at the strange phenomenon caused by his own spiritual pressure, and his eyes revealed a bit of disappointment. It's too weak. Is it just this level? Compared to the rumor that Aizen Sosok's future trajectory was enough to knock down the Soul King Palace in another space above the Seireitei with just the sealed spiritual pressure, Senju Makoto did not feel proud at all. After all, the standard that Senju Makoto used to measure and compare himself was never the vision of 1 or 2 hollows. The reason why Senju Makoto decided to release his spiritual pressure as much as possible was that Bailijin led the group of hollows to him. More importantly, Senju Makoto sensed that the position of zanpakutō Suigetsu was almost on the other side of Yuko Mundo from himself. Even with this level of spiritual pressure, Senju Makoto was not worried about being detected by Aizen Sosok, who was so far away. Sorry, Captain Aizen, playing chess. I'm going to flip the chessboard now. Senju Makoto narrowed his eyes slightly and tapped the armrest of the deadwood throne with his fingers. In an instant, under the support of Senju Makoto's huge spiritual pressure and the rich spiritual density of Yuko Mundo, with Senju Makoto as the center, large tracts of dead trees emerged crazily and enveloped the huge number of large hollows. Boom boom. 10 meters, 100 meters, 1,000 meters, in just a blink of an eye, in the eyes of many large hollows, Senju Makoto almost created another large hollow forest with his own strength. And they seemed to be small reptiles trapped in the large hollow forest. Fear. Many self-aware Chukkas-level large hollows instinctively developed an unspeakable extreme fear, looking at the existence on the deadwood throne surrounded by countless dead trees in horror. At this moment, even Bailijin completely lost his will to fight, and his heart was completely occupied by fear. Yuko Mundo, why does such a terrifying existence exist? Even the great hollow that tried to challenge the Soul King Palace on its own in the ancient times was not at this level, right? especially knowing that Senju Cheng could ignore decay. Facing Senju Cheng sitting on the deadwood throne, Bailijin, the king of Hukomundo, even developed an emotion called despair. Then, let Hukomundo calm down for 100 years, Senju Cheng said with some emotion and tenderness. In Senju Cheng's eyes, the group of hollows led by King of Hukomundo Bailijin should have occupied more than half of the forces above the level of Uchukas in the entire Hukomundo. In this way, after completely wiping out the group of hollows in front of them, there is no point for the Expeditionary Corps to continue to stay in Hukomundo. There'll not be a large number of Expeditionary Corps Shinigami injured in battle, and thus treated by the doctors of the 4th Division. Just treat this as early treatment, Senju Cheng said silently, his palm slightly raised, his eyes gradually turned into indifference, preparing to manipulate this nearly 1,000-meter-high deadwood forest to forcibly purify all the hollows. Suddenly, an equally exaggerated spiritual pressure erupted from the periphery of the deadwood forest. Before Senju Cheng could react, thousands of hollows close to the level of Vastode fell into the deadwood forest. Boom, boom, boom. Even though that deadwood forest created by Senju Cheng was extremely hard and strong enough to withstand the attack of the level of Uchukas, it was undoubtedly inadequate in the face of the hollows of the level of Vastode. Not to mention, thousands of hollows of the level of Vastode erupted at once in the blink of an eye. The next moment, as the smoke dissipated, the deadwood forest almost forcibly opened up an extremely spacious passage from the outside. At the other end of the passage was Koye Stark, who was in zanpakutō returning to the blade state, wearing a grey and white coat, holding 2 guns, and a vastole that looked quite similar to a demon. However, what made Senju Cheng's pupils shrink was the man wearing the captain's adori standing between the 2 vastole-level hollows, Aiden Sosok. Chapter 306 The Meeting of Two Kings. Aiden Sosok. Why? How did he appear here? Senju Cheng's eyes turned, and then fell on Aiden Sosok's empty waist. In order to hide in the dark and not be detected by me, you are willing to temporarily abandon your zanpakutō? Although Senju Cheng had once guessed that Aiden Sosok might do this, when he saw this scene with his own eyes, he was truly sure that he was so worthy of fear and attention in Aiden Sosok's eyes. After all, for a normal Shinigami, zanpakutō is almost equivalent to something that cannot be discarded, and it is also the source of most of the power. It's an honor, Aizen-kun, Senju Cheng said silently, and then his eyes fell on the 2 vastos standing beside Aiden Sosok. Among them, Koye Stark was the no. One of the 10 espadas in the original track, and one of the only 2 autonomous Arensei vastas in Hukomundo. Makao Senju could be said to have recognized him immediately. Just now, it was undoubtedly Koye Stark who entered the reincarnation state, activated the infinite recharge of hollows, released thousands of hollows in just a few seconds, and forcibly opened a passage in the deadwood forest. Terrible, compared with the hollows released by the vast majority of the great hollows gathered by Bailijin, Stark is almost equivalent to a humanoid self-propelled hollow gatling, and the quality of the hollows released is undoubtedly much stronger than the uneven great hollows. In addition, Makao Senju simply identified another Vastop that looked quite similar to a demon, and a guess emerged in his mind. After the Arensei, the reincarnation is called Black-Winged Demon Ulkirasifa. At the same time, he was the only one who completed his own Arensei regain after completing his first Arensei under the power of the Hodyoku, thus possessing a second hollow. Thinking of this, Senju Cheng couldn't help but turn his head and glance at the little leopard beside him. Sometimes, I'm afraid of comparison. The appearance of Aiden Sosok and his party also attracted the situation on the scene to change. Aiden Sosok faced those gazes and walked calmly towards the center of the deadwood forest, as if he was the king inspecting his territory. The deadwood forest that changed the desert terrain on a large scale, and the thousands of hollows emitting powerful spiritual pressure, seemed to be unable to be truly reflected on the lenses of Aiden Sosok's glasses. Under the protection of Stark and Ulkira, Aiden Sosok walked step by step to the center of the deadwood forest, forming a triangle with Senju Cheng and Bailijin. Then, Aiden Sosok first glanced at the extraordinary Bailijin, then stopped at Senju Cheng who was sitting on the deadwood throne, and clapped his hands gently. Instantly, a somewhat abrupt applause sounded in the deadwood forest. The amazing spiritual pressure just now, I thought it was the spiritual pressure possessed by Bailijin, the king of Hukomundo, but I didn't expect it to be someone else. It's really wonderful. After a pause, Aiden Sosok pushed his glasses, seemingly completely ignoring Bailijin, staring at Senju Cheng and said, "Here, I have to admit that I have underestimated Hukomundo in the past. Whether it is spiritual pressure, or posture and demeanor, it is undoubtedly that you, who used to be unknown, are more worthy of the name of King of Hukomundo. Makoto Senju still kept one hand supporting his chin, silently looking at Aizen Sasuke in front of him. On the contrary, Byakugan, as if he had heard unbearable words of disobedience and offense, with the black mist rising from his body, he looked at Aizen Sasuke in anger and shouted, "A mere death god dares to be so arrogant." Aizen Sasuke heard the words, glanced at Byakugan, and suddenly a terrifying spiritual pressure burst out from his body and rushed straight into the night sky, instantly stirring up a large area of materialized airwaves in the entire deadwood forest. This level of spiritual pressure, Makoto Senju narrowed his eyes and stared at Aizen Sasuke, who lowered his head slightly and could not see his eyes at all under the cover of the lens. Confrontation. Even though Senju Makoto had always overestimated Aizen Sasuke in the past, he still didn't expect Aizen Sasuke's spiritual pressure to be so strong at this time. Obviously, I was secretly accumulating spiritual power with the help of the forest seed in the Seireitei. Could Aizen Sasuke have reached this level just by relying on the talents of his own spiritual body? No, this has exceeded the maximum value of a normal spiritual body in theory. Is it a Hodyoku? What Senju Makoto was secretly thinking, under the collision of the extraordinary spiritual pressure between Senju Makoto and Aizen Sasuke, the hollows in the deadwood forest undoubtedly felt a terrifying pressure. Some of the Jillian-level hollows who were too close to Senju Makoto and Aizen Sasuke even began to collapse under the collision of the two spiritual pressures. As for Byakugan, he subconsciously took a step back, and an idea inexplicably emerged in his mind. Is this really a place where he, as the king of Hukomundo, can get involved? Although spiritual pressure alone cannot explain anything, under normal circumstances, even if Byakugan faces this level of spiritual pressure, relying on the power of decay, he will never retreat. However, under the impact of Senju Makoto's picture of ignoring decay, two spiritual pressures that have surpassed the level of Vastold appeared one after another. This undoubtedly made a certain shadow in Byakugan's heart expand rapidly, and even made Byakugan waver in his ability to decay. Gradually, as Byakugan retreated step by step, the triangular trend that was originally maintained on the surface dispersed. In the deadwood forest, Senju Makoto and Aizen Sasuke looked at each other, and the collision of the two terrifying spiritual pressures soaring into the sky was as if two real kings collided with each other. In the end, Senju Makoto, who was sitting on the deadwood throne with one hand supporting his chin, seemed to be serious, and his waist straightened, staring at Aizen Sasuke and spoke. "Death God, what's your name?" Aizen Sasuke asked after saying his name. "Hollow, what's your name?" "Azura Kautenri." Senju Makoto's expression didn't change at all when he said this name. Aizen Sasuke raised his head, and Senju Makoto's appearance was reflected on the lens of his glasses, and he commented. "You, who hold the name of Ashura, are undoubtedly the most powerful existence I have ever seen in Hukomundo." "You are too flattering," Senju Makoto responded calmly, and then said, "As the god of death, what is your purpose in coming to Hukomundo? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 307. Everyone, I like war. At this moment, in this forest of dead trees that suddenly appeared in Hukomundo, the sights of Makoto Senju and Sasuke truly intersected. It was a familiar yet strange look. It was different from the look that Makoto Senju had seen in Sasuke in the past, which always seemed gentle and sincere, as if showing friendliness and closeness all the time. Arrogant, confident, indifferent, and seemed to be looking down on everything. Obviously, there was no change in appearance, but Sasuke had almost undergone a drastic change in temperament compared to the past. And Sasuke looked at the Vastod in front of him who called himself Azura Yonching, but he also had a familiar yet strange feeling. What was strange was the appearance, temperament and other appearances, but what was familiar was the occasional flash of eyes that seemed calm and indifferent. Could it be? A certain guess flashed through Aizen Sasuke's mind subconsciously. But the facts in front of him, no matter from which angle, Senju Makoto almost completely meets the characteristics of a Vastod. Even the spiritual pressure fluctuations representing different spiritual body characteristics are completely different from Senju Makoto's original spiritual pressure fluctuations, but instead exude the spiritual pressure fluctuation characteristics of a large hollow. Facing the scrutiny revealed in Aizen Sasuke's eyes, Senju Makoto's expression has almost no extra fluctuations. Senju Makoto only gently stroked the head of Grimjow in the shape of a white leopard with one palm. The indifferent arrogance revealed in his every move undoubtedly made Aizen Sasuke feel extremely unfamiliar. After all, Senju Cheng has completed most of the analytical research on Harable, who is at the level of Vastop. After mastering enough data, Senju Cheng, who can even perfectly create another spiritual body, has almost no difficulty in disguising his own spiritual body accordingly. In a sense, this is somewhat similar to the law of energy conservation. Cheng Senju cannot hide all his spiritual pressure out of thin air, but it is not difficult to convert the original spiritual pressure into the characteristics of a Vastop level hollow. The only flaw is that he witnessed the scene of Noitra crashing into this order that Dr. Senju and committing suicide, which basically confirmed that the zanpakutō in Cheng Senju's hand belonged to Grim Zhao, the god of death. Therefore, Cheng Senju's palm will gently stroke Grim Zhao's head, so that when some accidents occur, Grim Zhao can shut up completely in time. For this behavior, similar to stroking a cat, as an case with the appearance of a white leopard, the proud Grim Zhao naturally instinctively resists this somewhat insulting behavior. However, under the huge spiritual pressure of Senju Cheng, Grim Zhao could only accept this action voluntarily. After Senju Cheng stroked back and forth for a few times, Grim Zhao's eyes slowly widened a little, as if he had discovered a new world. It seems very comfortable. The next moment, Grim Zhao's eyes regained firmness, and his head unconsciously raised slightly, making it easier for Senju Cheng to stroke his palm, and he said secretly, "No, I was forced, not voluntarily." Of course, for the two kings who were in the deadwood forest at this moment, Grim Zhao's slight reaction did not attract any attention at all. When Aizen Sosok hesitated to answer, Senju Cheng had various thoughts in his mind, but he still spoke calmly. "You don't mean to answer, just to go to with Huko Mundo." These words that secretly contain instigation and hints were heard by the hollows, and undoubtedly made the eyes of many hollows looking at Aizen Sosok more hostile. The Shinigami have never been a popular group in Huko Mundo. War. Aizen Sosok pushed his glasses, glanced at the many hollows in front of him obscurely, opened his hands, as if he was embracing something, and said, "Everyone, I like war. Everyone, don't you think that Soul Society has been so high and mighty for too long? They arbitrarily define everything, and arbitrarily define the normal and reasonable behavior of hollows to maintain themselves and evolve as evil, and give hollows the so-called necessary purification and elimination. Too arrogant, even though I am a Shinigami, I cannot tolerate this kind of arrogance that tramples on common sense, compared with the Shinigami who wantonly slaughtered countless hollows for the so-called justice, compared with the hollows who simply followed their instincts to maintain themselves and evolve and devour the necessary souls. Which side is more evil?" This series of words full of bewitching words, from the mouth of Aizen Sosok, was clearly transmitted to the ears of the hollows present. Although the great hollows of Killian's level do not have the ability to think for themselves, the Uchikage who truly symbolized combat power undoubtedly have self-awareness and considerable wisdom. These words undoubtedly made the emotions of the Uchikage who surrendered to Bilegum rise inexplicably, and they were deeply resonated by those words. Only Senju Cheng did not change his expression from beginning to end, and he understood that Aizen Sosok's speech was a sophistry of substitution. Perhaps, it was feasible to deceive those Uchikage who had never received any education, but in the eyes of Senju Cheng, it was full of loopholes. Whether the Seireitei was just or not is not discussed for the time being, but under Aizen Sosok's words, he used the subjective standpoint of the hollow to define it, and forced the maintenance of order and instinctive barbarism into the category of justice and evil for judgment. So, gentlemen, I like war. Only war can change the situation between Soul Society and Huko Mundo, and change the rule defined by Soul Society. Hollows represent evil from the moment they are born. However, this is not a status quo that can be changed by just one Shinigami. Only with the power of every hollow can we have a chance to change all this. Everyone, I will be the king, leading you to enjoy what your heart's content and grasp victory." As Aizen Sosok's last word fell, what he revealed was undoubtedly the true arrogant domineering, as if he was announcing a certain established fact. In addition, the terrifying spiritual pressure released by Aizen Sosok almost made the group of hollows present subconsciously feel that they could not breathe, and instinctively wanted to bow to the Shinigami who stood proudly. More importantly, compared with the king of Huko Mundo Bilegum, Aizen Sosok is almost completely not on the same level in terms of spiritual pressure or charm. The only thing that made the Uchikage present hesitate was undoubtedly the existence on the withered wood throne who was silent but exuded terrifying spiritual pressure. Chapter 308 First Contact. It has to be said that Aizen Sosok's personal charm is undoubtedly demonstrated at this moment. If those words were spoken by Ikaku Mabaramil, it would only be a comedic effect with a strong sense of contrast. However, when spoken by Aizen Sosok, it is extremely bewitching and attractive. Regardless of whether you agree with Aizen Sosok's lofty ideal of fighting for the entire Hukomundo, you'll still be unconsciously convinced by Aizen Sosok's personal courage and charm, and be willing to follow Aizen Sosok to declare war on the world and be the enemy of the world. Even Grim Zhao, who was originally lying on the side of Senju Cheng, unconsciously let out a low roar, as if he could no longer suppress the urge to fight, until Senju Cheng gently slapped Grim Zhao's side face, which made Grim Zhao sober up and realize who he should fight for. Senju Cheng thought for a while, and slowly spoke in a calm and rational tone. Aizen Sosok, is this your goal? To incite the entire Hukomundo, to forcefully kidnap most of the Hukomundo onto the chariot to fight against the Seireitei, and to achieve a personal goal without sacrificing the foreseeable casualties. There has never been a victory that does not require sacrifice. After a pause, Aizen Sosok asked back. Even as a Shinigami, I am willing to stand on the side of Hukomundo and fight against Soul Society at the cost of my life. As a vast herald, are you doubting this based on some fear of sacrifice? At this moment, Senju Cheng deeply realized that Aizen Sosok was not only the best in the world in terms of strength and wisdom, but also very good at talking. This question is almost as good as Xiaobai questioning why Xiaokui didn't help Xiaokui, let alone Senju Cheng is just a pure and kind doctor who is black on the outside and white on the inside. Even if he is a real vast herald, there is no way to defend it. Even if there is a slight doubt, it will only make Senju Cheng's position appear to have ulterior motives. For a moment, Senju Cheng couldn't help but feel a bit caught between a rock and a hard place. Aizen Sosok's unexpected appearance not only destroyed Senju Cheng's plan to take advantage of the opportunity to wipe out Bailijin's hollows in one fell swoop, but also intended to subdue these hollows in front of Senju Cheng. Isn't this also a kind of, however, with the apparent spiritual pressure strength of both parties being similar, Senju Cheng undoubtedly has no confidence in turning the table face to face with Aizen Sosok for the time being. Not to mention, Aizen Sosok seems to have completely subdued Stark and Ulquiorra, making the combat power controlled by Senju Cheng obviously at a disadvantage in comparison. Without waiting for Senju Cheng to try to find another angle to disrupt Aizen Sosok's temptation, Aizen Sosok continued to speak. Cheng, how about joining my army? I will give you a position and power second only to mine. When he said this, Senju Cheng clearly noticed a flash of scrutiny in Aizen Sosok's eyes. What is he scrutinizing? Did he doubt my identity because such a great hollow appeared silently in Hukomundo? At this moment, even if Senju Cheng was confident that his disguise would never be seen through so easily, his heart was still a little tense. Senju Cheng's mind was working quickly. In Aizen Sosok's cognition, I'm undoubtedly the kind of person who knows most of his true face and is opposed to him everywhere. This time, I'm afraid that Aizen Sosok, in addition to wanting to control Hukomundo, also wants to wipe me out. Therefore, in Aizen Sosok's cognition, if I were Senju Cheng, I would definitely continue to do everything possible to destroy his plan. Suddenly, Senju Cheng's heart was moved, and a bold idea came into his mind. No matter what, I am still in the dark now, but Aizen Sosok is already in the light. This is the only advantage. So what is the darkest place? With this thought, Senju Cheng, who was sitting on the deadwood throne, leaned forward slightly, showing a feeling that seemed to have generated some interest, and asked. Aizen Sosok, all this is just your one-sided words. As a god of death, do you intend to become the king of Hukomundo just by this? Don't you think it's too arrogant? Aizen Sosok's mouth slightly raised, turned to look at Bailijin, and said. Arrogant? No, I'm just stating a fact. Do you think Bailijin is still qualified to bear the title of king of Hukomundo? After a pause, Aizen Sosok once again ignored Bailijin, whose anger was rising, and stated. Today, the king of Hukomundo will only be between you and me, right? After this, Senju Cheng's expression was a little silent. Compared with the various rules and order of the Seireitei, Hukomundo undoubtedly believes in the rule of the strong. It is obvious that Bailijin cannot continue to bear the title of king of Hukomundo. So, compared with me as a god of death, do you think you are more suitable to be the king of Hukomundo? Aizen Sosok's tone seemed to be meaningful, and the word god of death was even more serious. Senju Cheng seemed to be silent for a while, shook his head, and said. I don't like fighting, but I'm more afraid that Hukomundo will be destroyed. Aizen Sosok's eyes flashed slightly and said. So, isn't it more necessary for you to join? Cheng. This time, under the gaze of Aizen Sosok, the deadwood throne where Senju Cheng sat slowly moved until it stopped in front of Aizen Sosok. Then, Senju Cheng stood up from the deadwood throne, looked at Aizen Sasuke at eye level, and then stretched out his palm towards Aizen Sasuke and spoke. I don't like to fight, and I usually just stay asleep most of the time, so please don't have too many expectations of me. Aizen Sasuke lowered his head and glanced at Senju Cheng's outstretched palm, and after a few breaths of silence, he stretched out his hand and shook it with Senju Cheng, and replied. Welcome, from now on you'll be the number 0 among the 10 espada of the Seireitei Corps I plan to create, and you will have a position and power second only to me in the real sense in Hukomundo. At this moment, in the Deadwood Forest, the scene of Makatao Senju and Aizen Sasuke shaking hands seemed to freeze for a moment. And under this first contact in the real sense, Makatao Senju and Aizen Sasuke's thoughts in their hearts were slightly different. Makatao Senju. Aizen Sasuke's palm is unexpectedly broad and warm. Should I take the opportunity to break his defense and plant seeds for Captain Aizen? Aizen Sasuke. It's unexpectedly cold, like the palm of a dead tree. Maybe I can take the opportunity to collect some spirits and spirit particles for research and comparison. P.S. I need to sort out a lot of follow-up arrangements recently, so I always get stuck. The third update has to be postponed for several consecutive days before it can be completed, therefore, I will simply write the third update slowly tonight and post it early with tomorrow's update. That's all. Chapter 309 Suspicion. Of course, this momentary thought is not to be told to outsiders. Makatao Senju and Sasuke both hold the idea of a long future, and do not take such an adventure at this critical juncture. However, what makes Makatao Senju feel quite ironic is that after the handshake between Makatao Senju and Sasuke, the two gods of death, and the consensus reached, Sasuke replaced Byakugan as the nominal king of Hukomundo. As for Byakugan's opinion and attitude, under the gazes of Makatao Senju and Sasuke, Byakugan, who has always been brutal and domineering in front of his subordinates, chose to kneel down slowly to Sasuke under the fear of death. In front of Makatao Senju and Sasuke, some angry and unwilling thoughts in the kneeling Byakugan's heart are almost unobstructed. However, whether it is Makatao Senju or Sasuke, they have undoubtedly never really regarded Byakugan as an equal to themselves. Resentment, anger, unwillingness. It's just the lament of the incompetent. Even Makatao Senju and Sasuke didn't even have the interest to continue to attack Byakugan. On the contrary, Sasuke seemed to attach great importance to Makatao Senju, who maintained the identity of Ashura Kautenri. After Sasuke signaled Byakugan to tidy up the slightly chaotic and disordered group of hollows, Sasuke personally introduced the identities of Stark and Ulquiorra to Makatao Senju. Among them, Makatao Senju looked at Stark, who looked almost the same as a middle-aged human male, with a particularly curious look. This is the only known completely autonomous hollow in Hukomundo besides Nell. As long as Stark's spirit is thoroughly analyzed, Makatao Senju will most likely be able to push the other bastards to achieve autonomous hollows. This is different from the hollows forcibly catalyzed by the Hojokyu. Autonomous hollows undoubtedly have greater potential and stronger strength. In the original track, Ulquiorra, who relied on his own potential to self-Seireitei regain on the basis of already being an Seireitei, thus gaining the ability of second stage return to Blade, is undoubtedly the best proof. Thinking of this, Senju Makatao couldn't help but look at Ulquiorra, but he was different from the iceberg handsome man in the original track after the Seireitei. At this moment, Ulquiorra's posture is similar to that of a human, but the overall appearance is undoubtedly more like a demon in the legend. The whole body is black, the devil's wings are spread, and the dark green eyes seem to be cold and empty for thousands of years. However, after Aizen Sasuke introduced everything to Senju Makatao, and even briefly described the abilities that Stark and Ulquiorra are good at, Senju Makatao, except for nodding occasionally, seemed to have no understanding of Aizen Sasuke's underlying meaning, and did not even have the intention to introduce himself. Aizen Sasuke's eyes flashed with a hint of amusement, and regardless of whether Senju Makatao was really slow, he asked directly. Ashura, is there anything you are good at? Good at? Senju Makatao's expression seemed to be stunned, and then after thinking hard for a while, he answered. I was born in a dead tree, and the time I actually walked in Hukomundo was very, very little. If I really have to say what I am good at, it seems that it is only dreaming. In the time of continuous sleep, I have beautiful dreams that last for hundreds and thousands of years. At the end, Senju Makatao's calm eyes seemed to flash a glimmer of light, and he said with emotion. In the beautiful dream, Hukomundo is no longer the monotonous and unchanging night and desolate white desert, and I am no longer alone watching countless dead trees wither. In short, after this speech, perhaps the rest of Vostok didn't hear any problems. But in Aizen Sosok's interpretation, Senju Makoto's words almost reveal a central idea with buffs stacked in the punctuation marks. I'm a lonely idealist waste. Apart from being lazy, sleeping and dreaming, I have never done anything practical. However, this kind of character setting is a classic in Hukomundo. It almost gathers a considerable number of characteristics of Vasto-level hollows, and there is nothing wrong with it. At this time, Bylojin, who had slightly reorganized the group of hollows, came back and said as if intentionally or unintentionally, Lord Aizen, Ashwin is not good at everything. He seems to have mastered the ability to turn other Vastos into Aranseis. Senju Makoto. Oh? Aizen Sosok heard this and asked casually. Ashura actually mastered this ability. I wonder if it was developed from medical skills. For a moment, Senju Makoto could not see any changes on the surface, but secretly he was undoubtedly eager to tear off all the bones in Bylojin's body and feed them to Captain Komamura Sujin. There is no doubt that once Senju Makoto revealed that he had some research on the Hollow's Aransei rune medical skills, it would undoubtedly make Aizen Sosok instantly connect Senju Makoto and Ashwin together. Senju Makoto, who had no choice, could only answer calmly. Medical skills? What is that? I just have some immature ideas about Aransei rune scientific research. Aizen Sosok showed a smile on his face for the first time, and even changed his address. Can Yanchim tell me about it? It just so happens that I am also preparing to conduct an experiment on the Hollow's Aransei. Senju Makoto, with a slightly sweaty palm, said in a somewhat embarrassed tone. It's just an immature idea. I originally planned to find another Vastot who had completed the autonomous Aransei to decompose and study, but I didn't expect to be intercepted here by the group of Hollows led by Bylojin. At this point, Senju Makoto glanced at Stark obscurely, and then quickly looked away. At this moment, Senju Makoto can undoubtedly only use this method to delay as much as possible. After all, Stark is a Vastot who is an autonomous Aransei. Aizen Sosok can't really choose to kill Stark to verify Senju Makoto's work for some uncertain speculation. However, what puzzled Senju Makoto was that Aizen Sosok then revealed a meaningful smile and said, "Isn't this a coincidence?" Then, Aizen Sosok nodded to Ulkira, and Ulkira understood, and with a flap of the black wings behind him, he quickly disappeared from the spot at a very terrifying speed. In a flash, the black shadow transformed by Ulkira appeared in front of Makoto Senju again, but there was a petite figure in his hand, and Ulkira threw it directly in front of Makoto Senju. Makoto Senju looked down at the face of the petite figure, his expression was startled, and he said a name. Nell. Chapter 310. Degraded Nilu. However, unlike the beautiful mature lady figure that Nell had when she was a self-Aransei, the one lying in front of Senju Makoto was a lily Nell with a body similar to Kusaka Yarai. There was a crack on the skull mask on her head, and there was a wound on her face that was constantly bleeding. Does Yanqing know this Aransei? Aizen Sosok asked. I know a little, Senju Makoto nodded and replied. I got some information about Nell from another Vastot, so I came to this area to look for her traces. I see, so I accidentally stole Yanqing's prey. What a pity. Aizen Sosok said this, but there was no apology in his tone, he just simply described it and replied. In order to find the location of Bylojin, I had to confirm the identity of each Vastot in Hukomundo based on the strength of spiritual pressure. This Aransei was encountered not long ago, however, because I was attracted by the huge spiritual pressure released by Cheng-ge, I didn't have much interest in continuing to persuade this Aransei, so I planned to kill her. But I didn't expect that after breaking the mask of this Aransei, it would cause such an unexpected change, so I planned to keep her for a while to conduct follow-up research. After a pause, Aizen Sosok looked at Senju Makoto and said with a little amusement. But since Yanqing needs this experimental material, then I will hand this Aransei over to Yanqing for disposal. It shouldn't take long to get the corresponding conclusion of Aransei transformation, right? Senju Makoto, who has become a tiger, obviously has no other choice. After indicating that Grimjow should carry the still unconscious Nell on his back, he thanked Aizen Sosok for the gift. Then, Aizen Sosok did not continue to test Senju Makoto, but led the group of Hollows directly to the location of Kainiak. When Aizen Sosok led the group of Hollows to Kainiak, Tosun Kaname and Ichimura Jin, who had contacted in advance through Kitten, were already waiting in Kainiak. What made Senju Makoto's eyes slightly tilted was the zanpakutō, Kyuka Switjetsu that Tosun Kaname held in both hands and handed back to Aizen Sosok. Really, Captain Aizen is really daring to take risks. Senju Makoto felt a pity for this. After all, if Senju Cheng had confirmed this in advance, and if Aizen Sasuke did not have the zanpakutō Switjetsu by his side, then Senju Cheng would definitely let Aizen Sasuke understand what justice meant by 10 against 1. The masked army, Urahara Kisuke, Shifu Yuan Yorishi, and even Unohana teacher all came together, plus the presence of Senju Cheng. Even if Aizen Sasuke, who did not have the Kijika Switjetsu, had the same strength as the world's top, he would definitely be beaten more effectively in the 10-to-1 justice than using the Keilu plug. In fact, Aizen Sasuke was beaten so hard that his equipment exploded on the spot, and even his Hojoku might not be beaten out. However, as Aizen Sasuke took back the zanpakutō Kijika Switjetsu, Senju Cheng could only give up this idea that he had not yet implemented. With Aizen Sasuke in possession of the zanpakutō Kijika Switjetsu, a group fight, for Aizen Sasuke, it made no sense, but would instead create all kinds of cannibalism. Aizen Sasuke was obviously very dissatisfied with the dilapidated status of the Kainiac Palace, so he directly arranged for Ichinrojin to organize the Hollow Group to rebuild the Kainiac Palace, and Tosen Kaname was responsible for supervision. For a while, Senju Cheng felt that Aizen Sasuke was really good at employing people. Supervisors often don't need any vision, and whether they are blind or not doesn't really matter. Supervisors do need to be blind occasionally, which is an advantage for Tosen Kaname, who is blind. As for top-level fighters like Senju Cheng, Stark, and Byakugan, Aizen Sasuke gave them considerable respect, and did not restrict any freedom, nor did he arrange any chores. In this regard, Senju Cheng quietly took Grimmjow and Nell to live in the Palace of the Night. It must be said that this feeling is quite wonderful for Senju Cheng, a god of death. It's almost like a flower that grows vigorously in the spring breeze, and one day it lives in the Eagle Source Palace and serves as a leader. The only pity is that in the early days when Aizen Sasuke just took control of the Palace of the Night, he had not really started large-scale experiments on the Hollows. Therefore, except for the Vastode level, the Great Hollows will be in human form, which is not like the future of the original trajectory of the Night Palace, where high-quality subordinates and mates can be seen everywhere. In the Night Palace today, apart from Killian, there is the beast-shaped Cheng-ge's. Then, Senju Cheng's eyes fell on the lily Nell. Seireitei, Vastode, it must be said that Nell is quite similar to Stark, and has almost reached the limit of what a Hollow can evolve. But after Nell's mask was destroyed, the whole person seemed to be degenerated and fell into a special state. The spiritual power is still leaking, and the spiritual pressure is also constantly decreasing. It is almost out of the Vastode level. After a preliminary examination of Nell, Senju Cheng came to a basic conclusion. However, what Senju Cheng found quite amazing was that Nell's Seireitei remained stable. Except for the mask on her head and the hollow, her body was almost indistinguishable from a normal human lily. Interesting, while Senju was secretly guessing at all the possibilities, his hands had already begun to consciously take off the overlong clothes on Nell after her degeneration, and then he was ready to conduct a thorough and in-depth study of Nell. Of course, as for what Senju had said to Aizen Sasuke before, research through decomposition, it was naturally not to that extent. From the perspective of medical skills, it is usually dissection, but for Senju, who always maintains the perspective of the microscopic world of spirit particles, dissection is unnecessary. Just a pair of eyes, a pair of hands and corresponding tools to make a shallow incision is enough. Soon, the last piece of clothing on Nell was skillfully taken off by Senju from above her head. However, what greeted Senju was Nell's pair of pure round eyes that suddenly opened, and her long eyelashes were still fluttering several times, as if expressing doubt about Senju's existence. Senju in an instant, Senju Cheng's movements completely froze, especially Nilou's current state and those pure eyes, which made Senju Cheng inexplicably feel that he was not conducting any serious research. Chapter 311 Nilou's father. Although, Senju Cheng was sure that he was just a serious and kind doctor, and the research he was going to conduct on Nilou was also serious and kind. But just like no doctor would communicate with his patient during the operation about whether the other person's heart, liver, spleen, lungs and kidneys were beautiful. And as Nilou, who was originally used as an experimental material by Senju Cheng, opened her eyes, Senju Cheng felt that the atmosphere was completely tense for a while. In this situation, Nilou's clothes have been taken off. Should the research continue? If not, wouldn't it be a waste of time? And next time, Senju Cheng will have to take off Nilou's clothes again. If he does, Senju Cheng always feels that the atmosphere is not right, the style is not right, and there is a sense of BT. After a while, in the awkward and confused look, Senju Cheng, who was affected by the memory of his previous life, blurted out a sentence unconsciously. Are you hungry? I'll give you something to eat. Nailu blinked and asked. Down there? What's that? Down there is, Senju Makoto's voice suddenly paused, and then he realized that there was no such thing as noodles in Hukomundo, so he could only answer vaguely. Well, it's quite delicious. In an instant, Nell's eyes lit up obviously, and she sat up directly, raised her little arm, and said, I want to eat, I want to eat. Senju Makoto. This made Senju Makoto a little speechless. In an environment like Hukomundo, where could Senju Makoto get some food for Nell? But the next moment, Senju Makoto seemed to have thought of something, turned his back to Nell, lowered his head, and fiddled with his hands. Nell was a little curious and wanted to look sideways, but she was completely covered by Senju Makoto's back and couldn't see anything. A moment later, just when Nell had unconsciously climbed up and wanted to look out, Senju Makoto turned around and found a whole bowl of white things in his hands. What is this? Nell's nose moved and asked curiously. This is the noodles I just made. Senju Makoto smiled and answered, but in his heart he couldn't help complaining about his own boredom, applying the ability of spirit control to such a boring place. For Hukomundo and Soul Society, the basis of matter is composed of spirit particles. However, Senju Makoto has never tried to form noodles through spirit control, so he just fiddled with it for so long and barely made such a portion of noodles. Of course, after the first experience, Senju Makoto will naturally be much faster in the future. However, Senju Makoto lowered his eyes and found that this portion of noodles was white, without the luster and color that food should have, and it was completely monotonous plain noodles. However, before Senju Makoto could open his mouth to suggest trying to add some sauce or something, Nell picked up the bowl that was almost as big as her head and slurped the noodles in big mouthfuls. In less than a moment, the plain noodles that looked unappetizing were completely eaten by Nailu. Nailu even licked the bowl with her pink tongue as if she was not satisfied. Seeing this scene, even Senju Makoto couldn't help but say something in confusion. Is it so delicious? Delicious, super delicious. Nailu looked at Senju Makoto with shining eyes and said, You are such a good person, thank you for your kindness. At this point, Nailu covered her head with both hands, and said painfully as if she was in great pain. Why can't I remember my name? Who am I? And why am I? It hurts. At this moment, Nailu suddenly felt her body lighten, and a warm palm covered her head, and a rather gentle voice sounded. Nailu, your name is Nailu. And Nailu. Nailu slowly raised her head and looked at Senju Makoto, repeating it several times, and then asked. Who are you then? Me? My name is Cheng. Senju Makoto answered. Cheng. Nell mumbled a few more words, then seemed to have thought of something, looked at Senju Makoto and asked. Are you Nell's father? Senju Makoto. Wait, this time, Senju Makoto almost choked. If Unohana-sensei knew that she had a daughter after going to Hukomundo, and even, this daughter was a hollow, wouldn't it make Unohana-sensei misunderstand that there was some super ace relationship between her and a hollow? Or confess to Unohana-sensei, she was going to be a mother? No, however, before Senju Makoto could explain the pure relationship between the two parties, Nell seemed to have determined something, and laughed innocently, hugged Senju Makoto tightly with both hands, and rubbed her head against Senju Makoto's chest. Thank you for the food, father. Your noodles are really delicious. I'll give them to Nell next time. Senju Makoto hesitated to speak again. In the end, he gave up telling Nell that he was a doctor who took off her clothes while she was unconscious and was preparing to study her secretly. At the same time, not far from the room where Senju Makoto stayed, the expressions of Asian Sasuke, Ichimura-jin and Tosen-Kanae were a little weird. The construction of the Kainyaku Palace was still in its early stages, so the room where Senju Makoto stayed naturally had no time to install any monitoring equipment, but that room also had no effect of blocking spiritual pressure. Therefore, in the spiritual pressure sensing of Asian Sasuke, Ichimura-jin and Tosen-Kanae, this distance could almost completely and clearly sense the position changes of Senju Makoto and Nell. At this moment, in the spiritual pressure sensing of Asian Sasuke and others, the positions of Senju Makoto and Nell were completely matched, and Nell was moving from time to time. More importantly, Asian Sasuke and the others knew exactly what the current state of Nell was like, and it was still a hollow, So Shinigami, who was quite righteous in most cases, showed a look of contempt and disdain on his face, and commented, "Ashwin Cheng's hobby is really disgusting. Indeed, an unimaginable hobby," Ichimura echoed, but the image of Matsumoto Ranjaiku in her lily period appeared in his mind, and his eyes subconsciously became more evasive. However, due to Ichimura-jin's habitual squinting, no one could see the change in Ichimura-jin's eyes. As for Aizen Sosok, his expression was almost visibly confused. Could it be that my guess was wrong? There is no connection between Ashwin Cheng and Makoto. Otherwise, Qing-jun would never have developed such a low-level and boring interest in such a hollow. Besides, Qing-jun has been under my surveillance during this period. Am I really overthinking it? Chapter 312 Treatment. No. At this moment, no matter from the appearance, breath, spiritual pressure, race, behavior, hobbies, and even logic, in the eyes of Aizen Sosok, Senju Makoto and Ashwin Cheng are completely unrelated. However, Aizen Sosok never believes in coincidences. When he was wondering why Senju Makoto had been staying in the expeditionary camp, and there seemed to be no reaction or action, a vast old-level Seireitei with such a high level of spiritual pressure suddenly appeared. And unlike the vast old that start recorded in the intelligence of the Seireitei, Ashwin Cheng seemed to suddenly appear in a Hutomundo and also mastered the abilities related to Seireitei. This is like a couple who are still in love and temporarily separated for a while. One of them is suddenly embraced by a very attractive opposite sex. This coincidence makes it difficult for Aizen Sosok not to think whether it is a plan of Senju Makoto. It's enough to confirm this kind of doubt in person. Aizen Sosok narrowed his eyes slightly, and assigned some tasks to Tosen Kaname and Ichimura-jin respectively, and disappeared silently in the Palace of the Night. In Senju Makoto's perception, according to the change in the position of zanpakutō Suigetsu, Aizen Sosok was undoubtedly heading straight for the expeditionary camp. In this regard, Senju Makoto did not make any reaction, and completely ignored whether Aizen Sosok was fishing or really returned to the expeditionary camp. Senju Makoto's daily life is still to coax Nell, and secretly begin to study Nell's spirit body to explore the secret of autonomous Seireitei. However, the innocent Nell is also very playful, even though Senju Makoto has a lot of experience in dealing with Lily, and can be called the strongest duo in Soul Society, he is still often so cute that he can't help but ravage her head. As for Grim Zhao, he was completely reduced to Nell's mount under the connivance of Senju Makoto. He was forced to ride and run wildly with Nell in the four directions of the Palace of the Night every day. In the expeditionary camp, Senbon Bancho, who maintained the appearance of Senju Makoto, was handling official business one by one with great care, and his pupils that occasionally raised seemed to have lost their light. Official business, official business, official business, and official business. Originally, Senbon Bancho agreed to Senju Makoto so happily. The original beautiful idea was to do some happy things that he had never experienced before under the face of Senju Makoto. For example, let the kitchen make all kinds of food for him 24 hours a day, or build a perfect playground in the camp that meets his fantasy. However, the cruel reality is that Senbon Bancho has to deal with official business one by one almost all the time except sleeping during this period of time. And, in order to avoid any flaws, Senbon Bancho must also regularly patrol the camp according to Senju Makoto's habit, comfort the wounded, count supplies, etc. Born as a god of death, is it so tiring? Senbon Bancho said that he couldn't understand, because the owner always had so much free time. What made Senbon Bancho even more angry was that due to the mysterious connection between him and the hateful owner, Senbon Bancho, who was on the verge of collapse, could clearly feel the joyful mood of the owner at all times. Damn it. Senbon Bancho slammed the pen in his hand to the ground, and stepped on it several times, still not satisfied. He was about to overturn the table piled with official business in front of him and announce the strike to the happy owner. Outside the tent, there was a sudden sound of hurried footsteps. The next moment, Senbon Bancho walked out with the gentle and steady posture of Senju Makoto and said, "What happened?" Senju, as if infected by Senju Makoto's gentle and steady posture, the originally anxious and out of control deaf god straightened his expression and bowed respectfully to answer. The patrol team found Lord Suzup and Lord Is who are seriously injured and unconscious in an area about 10 miles west of the camp. Hearing this, Senbon Bancho subconsciously thought, what did this have to do with him? Then, Senbon Bancho realized what he should do from the position of his master. How are they? Senbon Bancho asked. The god of death quickly answered. The patrol team has brought Lord Suzup and Lord Is back to the camp, and they are now being treated by the rescue team. Then, Senju Cheng hurriedly walked towards the area where the rescue team was stationed. Soon, Senju Cheng saw Lord Chojuro lying unconscious on the operating table, with bloodstains and charred carbonization everywhere on his body, and his situation was already somewhat critical. As the second god of death in charge of the rescue team, Yamada Hanatem heard that Senju Makoto was come in, and hurried over to report the situation to Senju Makoto in a somewhat embarrassed manner. In an instant, a bunch of terms related to Kido and medical skills came out of Yamada Hanatem's mouth. However, even if Senju Cheng is Senju Makoto's zanpakutō, it does not mean that the knowledge mastered by Senju Makoto will be fully mastered by Senju Cheng at the same time. However, Yamada Hanatem's last sentence made Senju Cheng, who was confused, very clear. In summary, Lord Suzu's injury must be treated as soon as possible, but if I do it, I have only about a 50% chance of success. This time I have to trouble Makoto to treat him personally. I do it. In fighting, Senju Cheng believes that he is more professional than his master, but treatment, that is an ability developed by Senju Makoto based on spiritual control and his own knowledge. How could Senju Cheng, who has no ravines in his mind, do such a mundane thing as feeding people? Senju Cheng's eyes turned, and under his seemingly gentle and calm eyes, he knew very well that if he treated Chojuro, there was no difference between that and sending Chojuro off in person. The next moment, under the somewhat surprised eyes of Yamada Hanatem, Senju Makoto, who always cherished life and was gentle and reliable, shook his head and replied, "No." Makoto-kun, Yamada Hanatem stared at Senju Makoto in a daze. Then, Senju Cheng almost perfectly imitated Senju Makoto's demeanor and temperament, looked at Yamada Hanatem with gentle eyes, and said, "Doctors must not retrieve because of the serious condition of the injured. When a doctor is facing a precious life that is constantly slipping away, what the doctor should do is not to hesitate and calculate the so-called success rate, but to do everything he can to save and restore that life." Chapter 313. The Lun family really tried their best. Upon hearing this, Yamada Hanatem subconsciously showed a look of shame on his face, but his tone was still full of hesitation and lack of confidence. But, Makoto-kun, I only have a 50% success rate, and if Makoto-kun does it himself, with Makoto-kun's ability, before Yamada Hanatem could finish, Senju Cheng interrupted Yamada Hanatem and said, "Hanatem, stop calculating those meaningless success rates. It is a doctor's job to have a firm belief in saving lives." After a pause, Senju Cheng turned his back to Yamada Hanatem and walked out, answering in a gentle tone with a bit of heaviness. "As for me, I have to be ready to protect the lives of the entire expeditionary army at any time. After all, Vice Captain Sparrow is unconscious near the camp. Doesn't this mean that the enemy is approaching?" Hearing this, Yamada Hanatem finally realized, as expected of Makoto-kun, it turned out that it was not that Makoto-kun was unwilling to treat Sparrow Chojuro, but that Makoto-kun was not only a doctor in the rescue team, but also shouldered the responsibility for the safety of the entire expeditionary army. His vision, awareness and realm are indeed far behind Makoto-kun. Thinking of this, Yamada Hanatem raised his head and shouted excitedly, "I understand, Makoto-kun, I will definitely do my best." Senju Cheng imitated Senju Makoto's movements, paused slightly, turned his head and looked at Yamada Hanatem behind him, and said, "Then, Vice Captain Sparrow will be handed over to you, Hanatem." "Yes." Yamada Hanatem answered excitedly, then turned around and began to busy himself with treating Sparrow Chojuro. Seeing this, Senju Cheng secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Senju Cheng's idea of the enemy being nearby was completely improvised. However, when he thought of this possibility, Senju Cheng couldn't help but feel a little excited. Fighting or something, it's really great. It would be best if the entire camp was destroyed in the aftermath of the battle, so that he would not have to deal with official business. Thinking of this, Senju Cheng turned around and hurried to the tent where the injured Izanagi was placed. Compared with the serious injuries of Suzaku Chojuro, Izanagi's condition is undoubtedly much better, and he only has minor injuries. And according to the report of the expeditionary patrol team, Suzaku Chojuro was not attacked at the place where he fainted. It is suspected that Izanagi and Suzaku Chojuro fled to the vicinity of the camp and couldn't hold on and fainted together. When Senju Cheng rushed to the tent, Izanagi had just completed the treatment and woke up slowly, just in time to see Senju Cheng with a look of anxiety and concern on his face. Izanagi's expression relaxed visibly, and she asked softly, Vice Captain Senju, did you save me and bring me back? However, for the unromantic Senju Cheng, he was more concerned about the enemy's intelligence, so he asked directly. What happened to Vice Captain is? Who hurt you? However, to Wisnaneo, it was undoubtedly more like the always gentle and humble Senju Makoto was angry because of his injury. For Wisnaneo, who was a black fan of Senju Makoto on the surface but a fanatical fan, this almost instantly satisfied her spirit. It's great to be cared for and loved by Senju-sama now. In an instant, Wisnaneo, who always looked like a cold, intellectual, capable and mature lady, had a little rosy cheeks, and pushed her glasses repeatedly with a slightly confused movement, as if to ease the excitement in her heart. Thank you, Vice Captain Senju. Senju Cheng. Senju Cheng was a little confused about Wisnaneo's thanks, but he still did not forget to always maintain Senju Makoto's seemingly pure and selfless image for the collective, and replied. You're welcome, this is what I have to do. Must do. Wisnaneo felt that his heart had suffered another critical blow, as if a pink arrow was going to completely pierce his heart. Being so protected and valued by the object of admiration is almost a dream come true. Subconsciously, Wisnaneo hurriedly persuaded. Makoto-kun, that's too dangerous. That kind of thing doesn't matter at all. Adhering to the noble and upright style of the owner of Cheng-ge, Senju Cheng replied with a firm face. It doesn't matter if I give my life for something I value. It's worth it. As soon as these words came out, it seemed as if time had suddenly stopped in Nano's eyes. The barren desert that was unique to Hukomundo around her quickly turned into a meadow surrounded by flowers with her and Makoto as the center. A breeze blew over, and Makoto seemed to look at her affectionately, confessing sincerely, Nano, you are what I value. For you, I don't mind giving my life. I will definitely protect you no matter what. I can't do it anymore. Nano, who had already survived the disaster and was still half tense, was under such a huge emotional shock. Her eyes rolled slightly, but she fainted again with an expression of excessive satisfaction. Seeing this, Senju Cheng could be said to be confused. However, while Senju Cheng maintained the appearance of Senju Makoto, he couldn't ask the other members of the rescue team to come and rescue Wisnaneo. Wouldn't this be completely contrary to the personality of the owner of the source? After Senju Cheng gritted his teeth and simply checked Wisnaneo, he was slightly relieved to find that Wisnaneo should have simply fainted. Then, in order to avoid the members of the rescue team from noticing that he had no knowledge of the Dayu and medical skills, Senju Cheng simply carried Wisnaneo and walked towards his tent. Along the way, facing the curiosity of some subordinates, Senju Cheng responded gently and humbly. It's okay. Vice Captain Iz's spirit is a little deficient. I'll take Vice Captain Iz back to my tent and give her acupuncture to replenish her nutrition. Of course, although there was nothing wrong with Senju Cheng's tone and demeanor on the surface, Senju Cheng himself couldn't help but have some self-doubt in secret. Master Cheng-ge usually says, should it be replenishing nutrition? Or filling up nutrition? Or piercing up nutrition? Whatever. It's almost the same anyway, Master Cheng-ge. The Lun family has really tried their best. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 314. Feelings that cannot be responded. Hukomundo, day and night. However, in the expeditionary camp that still uses Soul Society time, at night. Wisnaneo, who was immersed in a beautiful dream during her coma, slowly woke up when the rustling sound of writing became clearer in her ears. Somewhat blurred eyes, rosy cheeks, made Wisnaneo's always cold and capable temperament form a strong contrast, creating a strong temptation. As Wisnaneo's eyes slowly turned, in this slightly unfamiliar tent, she soon saw the familiar and longed for back. Senju Makoto, the memories hidden deep in her heart also slowly emerged in front of Wisnaneo. As early as more than 50 years ago, due to her mother's request, the young Wisnaneo directly bypassed the Mao Spiritual Academy through her uncle Kakushunsui and joined the 8th Division. Soon, the hollowification incident that Wisnaneo feared to this day happened. As a result, the familiar faces of the officers of the 8th Division disappeared, and even the sisterly Seireitei, who used to accompany her, completely disappeared. It was also after that incident that Izanao met Makoto Senju for the first time. In the hollowification incident, compared with the 8th Division, the losses of the 4th Division were undoubtedly more serious. Not only was the team house damaged, but even more than half of the team members were lost. But even so, compared with the sadness and fear of the disappearance of the people close to him, as the vice captain who took office in a critical situation and shouldered more responsibilities, Makoto Senju still dealt with everything so gently and calmly. It was as if a ray of warm sunshine was trying to use the light and heat it released to try to dispel all the sadness, even as a little transparent person who followed the other members of the 8th Division to the 4th Division, Makoto Senju still cast his gentle eyes on her and noticed the loneliness and sadness in his heart. That gentle and relaxed voice still often echoed in Izanao's mind. Hey? Where did this cute little lily come from? It's just that her face seems to be carrying something heavy, which will reduce her cuteness. Here, this lollipop is for you. How about a smile in exchange? It's okay, take it. I'm not a suspicious person, but the vice captain of the 4th Division, Makoto Senju. Of course, it's still temporary. However, if I can help you in any way, you can just ask. Protecting cute flowers like you is the driving force for our struggle. After saying this, Makoto Senju hurried to work, as if he had stopped for a while, trying to share some of his gentle smile with Izanao and left. Makoto Senju didn't even have time to ask Izanao's name, but Izanao has since firmly remembered the gentle name Makoto Senju, and has been secretly paying attention to one after another news related to Makoto Senju in the jingling court. At the same time, Izanao always pretended to be careless, nervous and cold-faced, stiff-bodied, and passed by Senju Makoto countless times, but she didn't even have the courage to turn her eyes and look at Senju Makoto. In order to meet Senju Makoto more often, Izanao has been working hard for more than 50 years. Without a zanpakutō, Izanao relied on her talent in ghost arts to ascend to the position of vice captain, and long awaited to say the first important words in her life to Senju Makoto. I'm Izanao, the vice captain of the 8th Division. Vice Captain Senju, please give me more guidance in the future. Thinking of this, Izanao's eyes flashed with a trace of regret. When I formally introduced myself that day, my condition was really terrible, and I could have introduced myself better. At this moment, as if sensing Izanao's movement, Senju Cheng turned slightly in the direction of Izanao and said with a bit of joy. Vice Captain you finally woke up. Upon hearing this, Izanao instinctively sat up, looked around, and said, Is this the tent of Vice Captain Senju? Senju Cheng thought that Izanao was going to ask for something, so he quickly explained. I'm sorry, Vice Captain I brought you here for no other reason. I just thought it would be more convenient to take care of you, and I would know the first time you woke up. Izanao. For a moment, and Izanao's ears, the second half of Senju Cheng's words echoed almost like a loop. Excited, his body trembled slightly unconsciously, his fists clenched, and he bit his lower lip lightly, but although Senju Cheng perfectly disguised Senju Makoto's manners and tone, in terms of his meticulous observation, Senju Cheng and Senju Makoto are completely on two different levels. Therefore, in Senju Cheng's eyes, Izanao seemed to be simply silent. What should I do? Oh, right, the trick that Master Cheng-ge often uses, changing the subject at this critical moment to distract the other party's attention. Senator Cheng's eyes lit up, and he casually picked up the official business he was handling and said, Vice Captain this official business involves whether the defense line should be contracted. How do you think it should be handled? Upon hearing this, Izanao looked coldly, staring straight ahead, and walked to their side without even looking at Senator Cheng. He picked up the official business and glanced at it, and he almost didn't need to think about it. At this moment, Senator Cheng looked at Izanao, but it seemed like he saw a savior, and said with a trembling voice, Vice Captain I'm a little tired today. I wonder if you can help me deal with the remaining official business. Izanao glanced at the pile of official business on the table, nodded without hesitation, and quickly began to deal with it with a calm and cold expression. Looking at Izanao's smooth movements, which were far more efficient than his own, if he didn't need to maintain his image as the master of the source, Senator Cheng would have almost cheered with tears in his eyes. But even so, Senator Cheng still couldn't help but sigh. Vice Captain you're really great. It's really unbearable to live without you. Izanao's movements in handling official business froze fiercely. He felt that his head was almost blank under the impact of this sentence, and an indescribable joy completely filled his entire soul. It's just, Isnao gritted his teeth, lowered his head to hide his expression, and tears unconsciously overflowed from his eyes. Ching-jun, I can't respond to you, I'm a person who carries the curse of the Is family. I can't respond to your feelings no matter what. Chapter 315. Changes in the Great Void Forest. As the Is family, which comes from a family of priests and is in charge of the Seireitei ritual, there is a curse that has been passed down for countless years. Any man who marries an Is family woman will die young. Isao is not sure whether Senju Cheng knows about the rumors of the Is family curse, but Isao does not want this curse to befall Senju Cheng. Therefore, it's just a small favor. Vice Captain Senju is too polite. Whether it is the voice or the tone of Isao, it seems to be as cold and calm as before. However, Senju Cheng is undoubtedly grateful to Isao at this moment, and his favorability towards Isao can be said to have quickly increased to the point second only to Senju Cheng. So much so that Senju Cheng inadvertently exposed a certain habit of his mouth and said, "No, Naneon really helped a lot. Naneon." As this name came into Isnao's ears, it made Isnao's ears faintly red. Although Kakushansui always used this frivolous name in the past, Isnao never felt the slightest bit of emotion about it. After all, Isnao knew that Uncle Kakushansui might be a respectable person, but his usual personality was just so frivolous and bad. However, when the same name Naneon was used, with Senju Cheng's handsome and gentle face, Isnao's breathing became a little faster unconsciously. Is this rude name really appropriate? Vice Captain Senju. Isnao's voice was a little stiffer, as if he was distancing himself from and warning Senju Cheng's behavior. After subconsciously exposing his habit of speaking, Senbon Bancho also realized that something was wrong. Senbon Bancho, who was facing away from Isnao, scratched his cheek subconsciously with his fingers, and then quickly restored Senju Cheng's usual demeanor and spoke gently. "Sorry, I was so impolite in the excitement. I am sorry, Vice Captain Isnao pushed his glasses and asked. "So, Vice Captain Senju usually treats me with that rude name in his heart." After a pause, Isnao continued to handle official business and said, "In this case, it's not impossible to be a little sincere when you're together in private. There is no doubt that the degree of vacillation of this question is enough to make Senbon Cheng's pocket CPU dry. Is this a hint? A scolding? Disdain? Or is it tacitly allowing him to call Isnao Naneon, or reminding him to apologize for his rudeness immediately?" In the end, Senbon Cheng whispered with some tentativeness and uncertainty. Naneon. This sentence almost made Isnao, who had a cold and capable expression, feel as if his body was softened, and his movements paused again. Senbon Cheng looked at Isnao from behind, but he seemed to have no reaction. Gradually, he understood a little and shouted again. "Naneon! Naneon! Naneon!" These gentle and intimate names were almost like powerful shocks that hit the depths of Isnao's heart. This was undoubtedly a scene like a dream. Just after Isnao's consciousness was in a trance for a moment, he suddenly stood up after tensing for a moment, and walked out of the tent after saying a word. "I forgot to tell Vice Captain Senju about the details of the attack. Please wait." However, what puzzled Senbon Cheng was why he had to leave the tent so suddenly before reporting the details. When Isnao came back again, he was dressed in a more formal and neat Vice Captain's outfit. His face looked even more unusually cold, refined and capable, and he was faintly radiant. He also had a stack of documents in his hands. As the stack of documents was placed in front of Senbon Cheng, it was full of records and information related to the Great Hollow Forest. Isnao then spoke. "When Vice Captain Suzuki and I set out to search for the hidden Achike's hollows in Hukomundo, we searched along the directions divided by the plan, but we didn't find any corresponding traces for a long time. However, during a battle with an unexpected Achike's, Vice Captain Suzuki and I accidentally entered the Great Hollow Forest, where there are countless low-level hollows and Jillian in common sense." When he said this, Isnao's expression became more solemn than ever. At this time, even Senbon Cheng vaguely guessed what Isnao meant and asked. "So a large number of Achike's are hidden in the Great Hollow Forest?" Isnao nodded and said. "That's right, but the most surprising thing is not the number of Achike's, but order. In the chaotic and evil Hukomundo, in the Great Hollow Forest, the most unlikely thing has appeared, order." At the same time, leading Sunday along one of the entrances to the Great Hollow Forest, Haribal arrived at this area, which is almost the origin of most of the Great Hollow Forest. Hollows are born from the souls of humans who are unable to let go of their obsessions, and they will devour human souls based on their instinctive desire. After a hollow devours a certain number of souls, or after it grows to a certain level, the improvement of the human soul on the hollow will decrease accordingly. Instead, the hollow will instinctively go to the Great Hollow Forest in Hukomundo. There are countless ordinary hollows in the Great Hollow Forest, and every moment, Jillian is formed by ordinary hollows devouring enough of their own kind and evolving. Compared with the desert environment on the surface of Hukomundo, most of the living beings are great hollows above the level of Achukas. In the past thousands of years, Bailajan, as the king of Hukomundo, has never looked at the lower level hollows who are like ants in his eyes, and his attitude towards the Great Hollow Forest is completely ignored. This also caused the Great Hollow Forest to become even more chaotic, and devouring and devolving completely became the only malady in the Great Hollow Forest. For Hannibal, whose self-awareness and concepts are constantly improving, recalling the years in the Great Hollow Forest, he undoubtedly showed disgust and dislike. Just when Hannibal could vaguely see the strange and familiar light in the Great Hollow Forest again, the two spiritual pressure reactions in front of him made Hannibal's expression slightly change. Achukes? And two of them. Before Hannibal could figure out why two Achukes appeared in the Great Hollow Forest together, the two Achukes blocked Hannibal's way forward. Chapter 316 The moment of merging with Butamimbwa Vastold. After sensing the Vastold level Great Hollow spiritual pressure emanating from Hannibal, the two Achukes turned around and fled without hesitation. Hannibal was not at all surprised by this reaction. After all, even most Vastold level Great Hollows would not be bored enough to deliberately devour a large number of Achukes. However, out of awe and fear of the higher level Great Hollows, most Achukes instinctively fled when facing Vastold. When Hannibal really arrived at the Great Hollow Forest through the passage, everything that appeared in front of Hannibal made Hannibal a little more surprised. Empty, in addition to the densely packed huge dead trees in the Great Hollow Forest, the hollows that devoured each other in almost every corner of the Great Hollow Forest in Hannibal's impression were nowhere to be seen. This made the Great Hollow Forest present a sense of emptiness similar to the surface desert of Hukomundo. Hannibal looked around, feeling slightly puzzled, but he did not go into the reason whether it was because the two Achukes had just devoured all the lower level hollows in this area. Then, Hannibal identified the direction and continued on his way according to what Senju Cheng said. However, what made Sun Sung, who was traveling with Hannibal, a little panicked was that the Great Hollow Forest seemed to be completely empty wherever they passed along the way, and there was no trace of any hollow at all. Lord Hannibal, something seems to be wrong, Sun Sung said in a low voice. Hannibal's face did not change at all, and he just responded in a deep voice. Hurry up. In fact, Hannibal was more aware of the unreasonableness in the Great Hollow Forest than Sun Sung. However, Hannibal could not abandon the mission he had agreed to with Ashwari and Cheng and turn around and leave just because of a little suspicion and unreasonableness. What even made Hannibal suspicious was that all this might be done by the target he was looking for, Synopsis. Otherwise, as a Vastop standing at the top of Hukomundo, it would be too suspicious for Synopsis to stay in the Great Hollow Forest. Such a bad behavior. Devouring a large number of lower-level hollows that are useless to him. Hannibal's calm eyes became more solemn, and he recalled the task that Ashwari and Cheng had given him. Go to the designated location to find that Vastop named Synopsis, report the 4 words Lazan Giant Buddha, confirm whether the other party's attitude is friendly and credible, and whether he can regard Synopsis as an ally. The large area of empty space in the Great Hollow Forest made Hannibal have a little more pessimistic expectations for the result of this mission. Such a bad Vastop, is it trustworthy? Just as Hannibal thought so, his footsteps did not stop at all, and his eyes were cast in a certain direction. The spiritual pressure of Vastop's level Great Hollow, and the position is exactly the same as described by Ashwari and Cheng. Hannibal hesitated for a moment, and ordered Sun Sung beside him. Sun Sung, wait for me here. Sun Sung's eyes widened slightly, and he instantly understood the problem that Hannibal was worried about. He nodded reluctantly and stopped, watching Hannibal completely disappear from his field of vision. As Hannibal continued to approach the Vastop spiritual pressure that seemed to have no hidden meaning, a huge outline appeared in front of Hannibal, causing Hannibal's pupils to tremble slightly. Just like most of the Achukes have an appearance similar to that of beasts, the appearance of Vastop's level Great Hollows will also tend to be humanoid. However, what appeared in front of Hannibal at this moment was an extremely huge existence, and it exuded the spiritual pressure of Vastop. Hundreds of meters, or thousands of meters high. The whole body was golden, and it seemed to be sitting cross-legged in the great void forest, with one hand pointing to the ground and the other hand pointing to the top of the great void forest, as if it was a great existence that opened up the great void forest. And as Hannibal got closer and closer to that existence, Hannibal could see the details of that huge existence. Compared with a real creature, it was undoubtedly more like a huge living Buddha statue. However, the details of this living Buddha statue are lifelike, and it also exuded the huge spiritual pressure of vast odd. The next moment, the giant Buddha statue, which had originally closed its eyes slightly, slowly opened its eyes and looked down at Hannibal, who was approaching not far away. The long voice echoed in the great void forest. "Amitabha, the donor is here. You knew I would come." Hannibal raised his eyebrows and asked. The giant Buddha statue answered slowly. "Everything in the world has cause and effect. The cause has been planted, and the donor's coming here is the result. This is the Buddhist principle. How can you know or not know?" This statement, which seemed to be full of Buddhist principles, undoubtedly gave Hannibal a sense of awe. He almost subconsciously felt a sense of mystery and majesty about the vast odd in front of him. "What do you mean?" Hannibal asked. "I, the supreme and supreme merciful, eternal peace and harmony, the thousand-handed Buddha of Zhongshan, have descended into the Hukomundo to create a paradise without fighting, devouring, or emptiness," the giant Buddha statue seemed to be telling with a smile, saying. "Although the donor has sunk into the sea of solitude and nothingness, and has tried to hinder the paradise, this is also the moment for the donor to put down his butcher knife and merge with my Buddha Minwa." Hannibal, who was still a little confused, suddenly condensed his eyes, but he understood it in an instant and said, "So that's how it is. Are you planning to devour me too?" "Donor, you misunderstood. I'm not my Buddha. How can I devour you?" The giant Buddha statue chanted leisurely. "My Buddha regards all beings as equal and does not speak lightly of killing. What I seek is to save the Hukomundo. Therefore, I beg you to join my Buddha and create a paradise together." Hannibal narrowed his eyes. Although the giant Buddha statue in front of him seemed to be talking about compassion and bliss, Hannibal vaguely felt some kind of hostility. Immediately, Hannibal spoke. "I have no interest in your Buddha. I came here to find a guy named Synopsis." The seemingly peaceful and compassionate look on the face of the giant Buddha statue suddenly condensed, and the eyes that were originally just slightly raised also widened several times, and the tone unconsciously revealed a bit of shock and confusion. "Synopsis. Where did you get this name?" Chapter 317. Imprisoned Hannibal. Just as Hannibal was about to answer, the voices of Sun Sung and Apache suddenly rang out from far behind Hannibal. "Master Hannibal, it's bad. Seireitei has captured Myra. And Seireitei has been monitoring us through some means. Bailajan seems to know the plan of Master Hannibal and Master Azura. It is very likely that Bailajan has already attacked Master Azura." Hearing the urgent and anxious information, Hannibal's expression suddenly sank, and two names were drilled out from between his teeth. Bailajan. Seireitei. Then, the angry and impatient Hannibal raised his head and looked at the giant Buddha statue in front of him, and said, "Tell Synopsis that the Levant giant Buddha is looking for him." After that, Hannibal flashed in the direction of Sun Sung and Apache, carrying Sun Sung and Apache and heading straight for the exit of the Great Void Forest. The giant Buddha statue, still sitting cross-legged, stared at Hannibal's back deeply, when Hannibal, with Sun Sung and Apache, quickly rushed to the surface desert of Hukomundo. He also understood the seriousness of the situation through the information brought back by Apache. Myra was captured by Seireitei, and Azuri and Cheng might have fallen into the ambush of Bailajan. Among them, compared with the threat of Seireitei, Hannibal was undoubtedly more worried about Azuri and Cheng's situation, and an unprecedented guilt filled his heart. If it weren't for saving himself, Azuri and Cheng would not have clashed with Bailajan. If he hadn't provided the information about Nel Duodi Shufunk, Azuri and Cheng would not have set out to find Nel Duodi Shufunk. For a time, Hannibal's worry about Senju Cheng reached an unprecedented level, and he even worried that Senju Cheng had been captured and swallowed up bit by Bailajan. Damn it. Wait for me, Azuri and Cheng. With this thought, Hannibal's speed increased again, and he rushed out of the great hollow forest at an astonishing speed. The next moment, Hannibal sensed the spiritual pressure of Seireitei. Angry. Unprecedented anger, even more anger than when his life was threatened by Bailajan. And for the normal hollows in Hukomundo, the best way to solve the problem is to fight. This made Hannibal put down Sun Sunday and Apache, and the whole person rushed straight towards Seireitei. Soon, Seireitei, who was hanging upside down with pink tentacles and entangled with Myra, appeared in front of Hannibal. Apollo, I will make you pay the price. With a roar, Hannibal swung the giant sword in his hand, and a stream of extremely hot water rushed towards Apollo frantically. Wherever the scorching current passed, it seemed that everything, including Apollo, would be melted by the extremely hot current. In response, Apollo raised his palm, but did not personally block the current. Several dull-eyed Ichikais stood in front of Apollo like puppets. Zzz, the Ichikais could not withstand the angry attack of Hannibal. However, just as the bodies of those Ichikais were melted by the scorching current, the remaining limbs suddenly exploded, and the huge impact force easily tore apart the aftermath of the scorching current. Apollo, who witnessed this scene, did not show any expression fluctuations, but spread his hands and said, Hannibal, we're both bastards of the same level, don't you plan to communicate with each other through negotiation? You start fighting as soon as you show up, but I'm scared. Hannibal obviously didn't believe what the extremely evil Apollo said, and his figure was almost like a shark running on the sand, holding a violent giant sword and quickly approaching Apollo. Apollo saw this, and while slowly holding Myra back, he stretched out his hand and waved it forward, and the Ichikais beside him seemed to have no mind and blocked between Hannibal and Apollo. Killing, or call it massacre, compared with Hannibal, who was at the same level as Vastop, those Ichikais who seemed to have no mind at all were not threatening at all. However, the human wall formed by Ichikais one after another blocked Hannibal's way, which made Hannibal, who followed the belief of sacrifice, even more angry. Apollo, are you playing with the lives of your subordinates so badly? This is a meaningless sacrifice, come out. Facing Hannibal's angry roar, Apollo answered calmly. No meaning. No, compared to us as Vastop, the mere Ichikais are meaningless. After a pause, Apollo seemed to say without hiding anything. On the contrary, being able to let them consume your spiritual pressure is a reasonable means of fighting for me who is good at research but not good at frontal combat. Despicable bastard, I must kill you. However, although Hannibal showed no mercy, he still couldn't break through to Apollo under the obstruction of the Ichikais. And as the slaughter continued, the bodies of the Ichikais gradually spread around Hannibal, and even made the surroundings filled with rich blood. At a certain moment, Hannibal seized the momentary gap, broke through the gradually sparse group of Ichikais, and rushed to Apollo with blood all over his body. Die, Apollo! At this moment, Hannibal's accumulated anger completely erupted, and his spiritual pressure also increased. The giant sword in his hand triggered a huge amount of water flow, trying to completely submerge Apollo. Pa. Facing the threat at hand, Apollo suddenly clapped his hands a few times and said playfully, It's really wonderful. It's worthy of being at the same level of Vastophead. The ability on the combat side is really terrible. It killed so many Ichikais in a short moment, but Apollo raised his eyes slightly and said with a bit of mockery, The battle is over, Hannibal. As Apollo's word fell, Hannibal's movement that was about to release the burning sea current completely froze, and his spirit seemed to be forcibly imprisoned, completely unable to move. Chapter 318. Apollo's target. What? Hannibal's eyes froze, and the action that was about to release the scorching sea flow was completely stopped in place, unable to move at all. Spiritual pressure. The next moment, Hannibal's spiritual pressure almost burst out to the maximum, stirring up a storm that seemed to be real. However, Hannibal's spirit body still seemed to have no reaction at all. And Apollo, who was standing in front of Hannibal, pushed his glasses and said with a mocking look, It's useless, Hannibal. This is not the binding ability similar to the death gods, which can forcibly break through the restraints through powerful spiritual pressure. What the hell did you do? Hannibal glared at Apollo and shouted. Apollo's expression did not change at all. With the high and mighty attitude of a winner, he spread his hands and said with a little more excitement, Toxin. This is a neurotoxin I developed that can target Vastop-level hollows. After a pause, Apollo brushed the hair that fell on his face due to excitement behind his ears and said enthusiastically, This is a power that is difficult for you beasts who are completely focused on rough fighting to understand. It is a power greater than the level of hollows, the power of science. Hannibal said angrily while still releasing his spiritual pressure to recover his actions. Asshole, what on earth did you poison me with? I haven't even touched you yet. Touched me? Apollo said mockingly. So, I really don't want to regard your so-called Vastop as the same kind, and you haven't reacted to how you inhaled the neurotoxin until now. Inhaled? Hannibal's pupils condensed slightly, but then he reacted. If there is something that he inhaled but didn't notice, then it is only blood mist. As a large number of Uchukas were slaughtered and countless blood was splashed, a thin layer of blood mist spread invisibly in the battlefield. Do you understand? That's right, Seireitei said mockingly. The neurotoxins are hidden in the blood of those Uchukas. As you continue to kill those Uchukas, you will absorb more and more neurotoxins. When it accumulates to a certain level, your body will completely lose its ability to move like it is now. After a pause, Seireitei approached Hilibel step by step and asked in an extremely vicious tone. Hilibel, how do you feel now? But you are completely in my hands. I can do whatever I want to you, whether you are studied, dismembered, or devoured. However, what surprised Seireitei was that in Hilibel's eyes, apart from anger, there was not a trace of fear. Seireitei understood it in a flash and said, Sorry, I almost forgot that the belief you believe in seems to be sacrifice, so you are indifferent to your own life. The next moment, Myra, who was hung upside down by a large number of pink tentacles, was suddenly brought in front of Hilibel, and those pink tentacles obviously tightened a circle. Ah! Myra, who was still in a coma, almost unconsciously let out a painful groan. In an instant, facing the screams of his subordinates, Hilibel's expression obviously changed, which made Seireitei's face more mocking. Then, with Seireitei's palm snapping his fingers, more than a dozen Uchukas appeared behind Seireitei, and then threw two figures in front of Hilibel and Seireitei. Son. Apache. Facing this scene, Hilibel's eyes were almost as if he wanted to bite people, and he said, Seireitei, you'd better devour me, otherwise I will kill you sooner or later. Oh? Upon hearing this, Seireitei raised his foot and stomped on Sunday Sun's back. Crack, crack, with a loud bang, a series of bone-breaking sounds were almost clearly heard on Sunday Sun's body, and the originally stable spiritual pressure was rapidly weakening. Damn it. At this moment, the spiritual pressure erupted from the taciturn Hilibel became even more crazy and desperate. Seireitei seemed to be appreciating something with satisfaction, and a look of joy appeared on his face. It was as if torturing Hilibel, who was also a Vastod, gave Seireitei some kind of strange pleasure. Then, Seireitei slowly raised his foot, wiped his blood-stained shoes on the desert as if he was disgusted, and then habitually stroked his hair and said, This is just an appetizer. If you don't agree to my conditions, I have countless ways to make your three lovely subordinates live a life worse than death in front of you. Hilibel was slightly stunned and asked angrily. Conditions? What conditions? Suddenly, Seireitei was also stunned, blinked, and said, Didn't I tell you? What greeted Seireitei was Hilibel's increasingly angry eyes. Seireitei coughed lightly, then kicked Sunday and Apache who were blocking his feet aside, walked to Hilibel, licked his lips and said, What do you think is your greatest value in my eyes? Vastos's body? No, of course, it's the power of Seireitei. I want to master the technology of Seireitei, do you understand? Hilibel's expression was startled, and he reacted instantly, staring at Seireitei and shouted. Your goal is Cheng. Seireitei said with desire and obsession in his eyes. That's right. My condition is to help me control Cheng, or let him hand over the technology of how to achieve Seireitei. Wishful thinking, I will never betray Cheng. Hilibel answered in a decisive tone. Seireitei's expression froze, and Myra, who was wrapped in pink tentacles, was controlled to press her face against Hilibel's face, threatening. Compared with Cheng, who you have only known for a few days, don't these lovely subordinates who have been with you for a long time matter? Hilibel looked at Myra, who was close at hand, with a trace of heartache in his eyes, and then simply closed his eyes and answered. Give up that unrealistic delusion, I will never betray another person I cherish for the sake of a person I cherish. After a pause, Hilibel opened his eyes again, and he had regained his usual calmness and said, Seireitei, your best option is to kill me. It is absolutely impossible for me to help you control Cheng. Chapter 319 Special Egg. For a moment. In the eyes of Hilibel, who seemed to have completely realized, Seireitei, who was originally arrogant and seemed to have controlled everything, gradually became angry, and his expression staring at Hilibel became increasingly ferocious. Seireitei roared in an incomprehensible voice. Hilibel, do you think that Cheng is more valuable than the lives of you and your three subordinates? Things called sacrifices do not exist in the form of a scale, and it is impossible to measure the so-called more important. Hilibel answered calmly. Under Hilibel's calm demeanor, Seireitei was completely enraged and said with a ferocious look. Fool, foolish thinking, do you think you are rejecting some proposal? You don't understand what mastering the Seireitei technique really means. Whoever truly possesses the technique that can completely change the direction of the entire Hukomundo is the king. God of the entire Hukomundo. It is even possible to completely control the soul society and the real world with this power. Do you understand? Horrible. At the end, Seireitei grabbed Horrible's neck and questioned excitedly and angrily. However, in response to Seireitei, Horrible was still extremely calm. So what? How? Under this question, Seireitei's chest rose and fell several times, but the whole person strangely calmed down quickly, and he sorted out his menace little by little, and then said, I heard about Cheng's ability to transform into an Seireitei through wiretapping. In order to divert Bailajan's attention, I also told Bailajan about it. Bailajan, that idiot, couldn't wait to summon all his Achikes and Killians to ambush Cheng, trying to completely eliminate Cheng, who might threaten his existence. Upon hearing this, Horrible's calm eyes flashed, and he looked at Seireitei with hatred and anxiety. Don't worry, Seireitei waved his hand and said. I know Bailajan better than he imagined. As Cheng can strangely ignore Bailajan's greatest reliance, the power of aging, Bailajan is not as threatening to Cheng as you are. Therefore, even if Bailajan brought a large number of hollows, Cheng does not have the obvious flaw of treasured subordinates like you. Bailajan cannot catch Cheng. Hearing this, Horrible secretly breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that he seemed to be a little too concerned, and mocked. Aren't you afraid that these words of yours will be heard by Bailajan, the king of Hukomundo? Ha ha ha, Seireitei said disdainfully. Vacant? He is just a cowardly king who is afraid of decay. In the past, I joined the Huko Symphony purely because I could have an endless supply of Achike's test subjects, and I didn't have to bother to capture them one by one myself. And, Seireitei paused and asked back. After I master the technique of how to transform into an Seireitei, do you think you will still be the king of Hukomundo? You won't master it. The only one who can master the technique is Cheng. Horrible said with a hint of yearning and expectation in his tone. However, what made Horrible a little sad was that he seemed to be unable to see the day when Cheng sat on the throne of king of Hukomundo. However, if Vacant can't do anything to Cheng will probably be able to find Nel Duodex Vank, right? The next moment, Seireitei released Myra, who was bound by the pink tentacles, and let Myra, who was covered with blood-red marks, slide down the desert. Seireitei opened his hands, as if he was embracing something, and his expression suddenly became ferocious and crazy. No, I want the technology. Since you were unwilling to cooperate, I can only carry out the prepared plan. Seeing this, Horrible answered firmly and disdainfully. No matter what, I will not betray Cheng. Your active assistance is not needed, Seireitei said while tearing off his clothes, revealing a large amount of bone shells and a body that seemed to be composed of countless pink tentacles. I know it, Horrible. Cheng attaches great importance to and trusts you, which means that Cheng may be defenseless when facing you. The next moment, a large number of pink tentacles rioted and danced wildly from Seireitei's body, and Seireitei's voice gradually became distorted. Although my frontal combat ability is far inferior to that of you bastards, my ability is that I can easily play with life. I can completely parasitize a specific egg into your body, and then control all your behaviors, waiting for an opportunity to transfer the specific egg to Cheng's body in some form, and then absorb and control everything about him. Horrible's eyes suddenly opened, and instinctively struggled violently again, and it seemed that under the resistance of Vostok's powerful spirit, the effect of the toxin that paralyzed Horrible's nerves was also rapidly fading, allowing Horrible's fingers holding the giant sword to move for a moment. Instantly, hope ignited in the depths of Horrible's eyes, and he quickly opened his mouth to try to delay time. It's useless. Your cautious and careful behavior is enough to show that the conditions for you to parasitize a specific egg are extremely harsh, and do you think Cheng can't tell a difference between a body controlled by others? Seireitei sneered and said. The parasitic conditions are naturally extremely harsh, so what? With the short time you have spent together, Cheng may not be able to discover the strange behavior. At this moment, the giant sword in Horrible's barely movable right hand suddenly slashed towards Seireitei's waist, as if intending to cut Seireitei in half. However, just as the giant sword was about to fall on Seireitei, under the interweaving of a large number of pink tentacles, the giant sword stopped in front of Seireitei. Can't wait. Horrible, if so, let's get started. As Seireitei's voice fell, the pink tentacles quickly began to spread along the giant sword towards Horrible's spirit. Chapter 320 I'm Synopsis. This scene made Haribel's expression really lose control. Death, for Haribel who believed in sacrifice, was not something that could not be looked at directly. What Haribel could not accept was that he would be used by the enemy to deal with the person he cherished. Ashwari Cheng. In Haribel's eyes, he was undoubtedly the most special existence. Veins popped out on Haribel's forehead, and his spiritual pressure surged as fast as it broke through the usual limit, and his voice roared hysterically. Move, for me. However, facing Haribel's outburst, Seireitei's expression did not change at all. As a rigorous and crazy Hukomundo scientist, how could Seireitei not be fully sure of the dosage and effect of the toxin he used? At this point, no matter how Haribel struggled, the paralyzed nerves could not fully implement a will into her body. However, just as Seireitei's pink tentacles were about to touch Haribel, the desert where he stood seemed to shake violently as if the world was turned upside down. Boom boom, a huge roar exploded, and the entire desert seemed like a sea in a storm, with countless sands shaking violently. What's going on? This unexpected situation made Seireitei instinctively look at the desert under his feet. As a Vastot who has lived in Hukomundo for hundreds of years, this terrifying desert shaking was the first time Seireitei had seen it. Then, Seireitei seemed to realize something and turned his head to look behind him. The next moment, behind Seireitei, countless sand waves rolled violently like a volcanic eruption, as if a mountain range was about to emerge from the sea of sand. What was even more terrifying was that Seireitei sensed a huge spiritual pressure approaching rapidly from below. And that spiritual pressure was another king of Hukomundo, a king that even Bailajan, who possessed the power of corruption, was extremely afraid of. Are you kidding? Seireitei widened his eyes and muttered to himself in a state of disbelief. How could he reach the surface of Hukomundo? His body is even bigger than a mountain. He is the largest Vastot ever. However, the reality seemed to be completely opposite to what Seireitei had expected. Countless sand waves rolled, and in just a few breaths, a sand dune hundreds of meters high suddenly appeared in front of Seireitei. Boom! With a loud bang, the sand dune hundreds of meters high was suddenly blown away. A golden giant arm stretched out from under the desert, and then flicked and slapped heavily in front of Seireitei. With this slap, Seireitei felt that the entire desert under his feet was shaken, and many sands were even shaken to jump nearly 100 meters high. Boom boom boom. The next moment, under Seireitei's completely frozen eyes, a terrifying giant creature crawled out from under the desert. The golden body looks like a giant Buddha, however, unlike the one that once sat cross-legged in the Great Void Forest and reached a height of several thousand meters, the giant Buddha at this moment has its eyes wide open, and its majestic body stretches across the desert, as if covering the sky and the moon. Compared with the giant Buddha, the size of Seireitei is just like a hair, not to mention Seireitei, even Haribel, who had just had a conversation with the giant Buddha from a distance not long ago, felt the incomparable pressure of the size at this time, and couldn't help but feel awe. Seireitei subconsciously exclaimed. The king of the Great Void Forest, you, how can you appear here? The giant Buddha's eyes turned, looking at Seireitei, who was as small as an ant below, and said, Seireitei, do you know me? Seireitei. Of course. I hate you so much, the giant Buddha responded, and before Seireitei could react, he suddenly slapped his palm towards Seireitei's position. Seireitei saw this, and no longer cared about controlling Haribel, and his body flashed madly in the direction away from the giant Buddha. However, the palm of the giant Buddha was more than tens of meters wide. When it fell, it was as if the whole sky collapsed, completely covering Seireitei. Boom! The next moment, the giant palm completely covered Seireitei. When the giant palm was raised again, Seireitei seemed to be swallowed up and disappeared completely without a trace. This horrible scene also made Haribel's heart jump hard. This kind of power, even for Vastot, is quite a foul existence, right? No, perhaps the most foul thing is the extremely huge body size. Generally speaking, the spirit of Vastot is close to human form, but the body size will also be reduced to a degree that is almost the same as that of humans. It is not that the hollows like slender bodies, but in the process of evolution, the internal density of the spirit body continues to increase, and the volume has to compromise. However, the extreme giant violent aesthetics displayed by the giant Buddha in front of him shows that this Vastot can actually have the spirit density of a normal Vastot while maintaining such a huge body. The next moment, Haribel's eyes turned and looked at the giant pit where the giant Buddha appeared. One after another, a Cheng-ge seemed to maintain some kind of queue and kept coming out of the giant pit that seemed to lead directly to the Great Hollow Forest. Although each Cheng-ge seemed to be only the most basic Cheng-ges, their neat movements were more like an army than the Cheng-ges of the Night Palace. In such a shocking scene, the giant Buddha lifted Hannibal with one finger and brought him to his eyes. For a moment, being thousands of meters high in the sky, Hannibal felt that he was extremely close to the moon of Mundo, and he also felt that the giant Buddha emitting golden light in front of him was like a big sun. The next moment, when the giant Buddha opened his mouth, a huge buzzing sound reached Hannibal's ears. "Vastod, where did you know the name of Lezan giant Buddha?" Hannibal, who had gradually recovered some of his mobility, suppressed his shock and answered in a dignified manner. "Tell me where Synopsis is." "I will only tell Synopsis the answer." The giant Buddha looked directly at Hannibal and spoke slowly. "I am Synopsis. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 321 Another Void King. At the same time, Aiden Sosok appeared near the expeditionary camp, slightly adjusted his clothes, and looked into the camp. "Mr. Makao, let me confirm a little bit." At this moment, Aiden Sosok's ears suddenly rang with the voice of Tosen Kaname using the 77th binding way. "Tenjokura." "Lord Aizen, I found some unexpected information." Aiden Sosok paused, and almost subconsciously thought of it with Ashwarukautenri. Bailajan concealed some important information. In a sense, he, the king of Mundo, is only the king of the surface of Mundo. In fact, he has completely lost control of the inner layer of Mundo to another ruler whose real name is unknown, Vastrode. According to further summarized and confirmed information, another man named Vastrode, who was respected as the king of the Great Hollow Forest, has not only achieved complete control over the Great Hollow Forest in the past 50 years, but has also completely absorbed all newer Cheng-ges in some way. Therefore, the power of the Mundo under Bailajan is much weaker than originally planned, and it can be completely controlled without the need for consumption by the expeditionary corps. Hearing this, Aiden Sosok frowned slightly, and while thinking, he continued to listen to the information conveyed by Tosen Kaname. According to the information that the Kuraya Palace already knew, the number of Cheng-ges under the command of the King of the Great Hollows is likely to be 3 to 5 times that of the Kuraya Palace. In other words, the source of the abnormal spiritual pressure of the Cheng-ges in Mundo detected by the 12th Division is not on the surface of Mundo, but in the Great Hollows. As for the King of the Great Hollows, he once fought with Bailajan. Relevant information shows that the Vastode is an unprecedented supergiant Great Hollow with a terrifying body comparable to a mountain range. That's all. Please make a decision and give instructions, Lord Aizen. As Tosen Kaname's last voice disappeared, Aiden Sosok lowered his head slightly and stayed in place for a few breaths. A supergiant Vastode-level Great Hollow. He has a number of Cheng-ges under his command that far exceeds that of the Kuraya Palace. Under all these factors, it is clear that the King of the Great Hollows may be much more difficult to deal with than Bailajan. At this moment, in the expeditionary camp, Makao Senju, Nanaoiz, and Chojiro Suzuki had just awakened were holding a meeting and communicating with the captains in the Seireitei at the same time. Through the information about the Great Hollow Forest brought back by Chojiro Suzuki and Nanaoiz, both the expeditionary army and the Seireitei now understand the problem. Mundo has a new Hollow King. And unlike Bailajan's almost laissez-faire management of Mundo, the Hollow King in the Great Hollow Forest has actually established a certain order in the Great Hollow Forest in the past 50 years, gathering a terrifying number of Cheng-ges-level hollows. With the instinct of Cheng-ges to divide their own kind to evolve, how can they maintain such a terrifying number? Although the captains still find it difficult to understand how the Hollow King in the Great Hollow Forest solved this problem, what is more important is how to solve the imminent emergency at hand. Not to mention the huge number of Cheng-ges hollows on the surface, which have begun to cause signs of soul imbalance. Just for the sake of the rule of the central 46 chambers, the Seireitei will never tolerate the emergence of such a high threat level of Cheng-ges hollows. Cheng-ges hollows of this level, if not careful, the entire Soul Society may be overwhelmed and destroyed by the terrifying Cheng-ges hollows. However, the compact power of the expeditionary corps on paper may be possible to continuously and sporadically nibble and purify a large number of Cheng-ges, but facing the terrifying Cheng-ges hollows that constitute the organization, No captain can withstand the endless bombardment of Ichike's hollow flash. However, if a large number of captain-level Shinigami combat forces are drawn from the Seireitei to support the Expeditionary Corps, once the Hollow King of the Great Hollow Forest opens the Black Cavity and directly attacks the Soul Society, the Expeditionary Corps may not be able to return in time. Some captains even raised doubts. With such a terrifying number of Ichikes in the Great Hollow Forest and the mysterious Great Hollow King, Chojuro Suzu and Nanoiz were able to escape from it. It was possible that it was part of the Great Hollow King's plan to attract some captains to leave Soul Society. For a while, Makoto Senju, Nanoiz and Chojuro Suzu in the Expeditionary Corps became foils, and the captains in the Seireitei Ichiban squad far away discussed and argued fiercely with each other. Among them, Unohana Retsu, whose temperament and demeanor was still so gentle and dignified, did not participate in the discussion between the captains. While listening with a gentle smile, his eyes would occasionally look at the communication screen newly developed by the Technology Development Bureau. However, what made Unohana Retsu's eyes flicker slightly was that Senju Makoto in the picture never looked at him from beginning to end. On the contrary, Unohana Retsu noticed that Senju Makoto in the picture occasionally looked at his Nano unintentionally, which inadvertently revealed a feeling of closeness. Strange, Unohana Retsu couldn't help but feel a little puzzled about this. This behavior was undoubtedly different from Senju Makoto's style of paying attention to some details in the past. Unohana Retsu, who paid great attention to details, knew a certain habit of Senju Makoto very well. Whenever he was beside him, Senju Makoto's eyes would always stay on him inadvertently from time to time. In a sense, perhaps this was an instinctive habit that even Senju Makoto himself did not notice, but now, Unohana Retsu did not observe the existence of this subtle instinctive habit from Senju Makoto on the screen. Is it because of the perspective of the communication screen transmitted by the picture? And at this moment, the figure of Aizen Sasuke appeared on the communication screen. It seems that the information I brought back is a little late. Aizen Sasuke naturally stood in the main seat in the Expeditionary Corps meeting tent. He bowed slightly and greeted the captains who were far away in the Seireitei in a gentle and elegant manner. He also nodded to Senju Makoto, Izanao and Chojuro respectively. Among them, Shinra Saibang's heart almost subconsciously tightened, and his mind kept recalling the various details taught by his master about facing Aizen Sasuke. As early as the beginning, when he asked Shinra Saibang to replace himself in the Expeditionary Corps camp, Senju Makoto understood that Shinra Saibang would most likely be confirmed by Aizen Sasuke himself. Therefore, Senju Makoto deliberately trained Shinra Saibang in advance for his reaction when facing Aizen Sasuke. Chapter 322 True and False. So in the face of Aizen Sasuke's nod, Senbon Bancho perfectly maintained the gentle and humble style of Senju Makoto, but only responded to Aizen Sasuke with a little distance and coldness. Aizen Sasuke's eyes stayed on Senbon Bancho for a moment, and then he gently and calmly reported the relevant information he knew to the captain's meeting. Of course, in Aizen Sasuke's mouth, the relevant information about the Great Hollow Forest was the information that Aizen Sasuke had forced out and personally verified after he ambushed and captured a close confidant of the Ichikes of the Hollow King Bailijin of the Hunyuan Palace. Therefore, in the information reported by Aizen Sasuke, the threat of the Hunyuan Palace was further reduced invisibly, and Bailijin's inaction became more and more obvious, highlighting that the Hunyuan Palace was in a clear disadvantageous position under the oppression of the Great Hollow Forest. Yamamoto Shinrai Shichikuni nodded and confirmed. So Captain Aizen believes that the real threat to Soul Society is the Hollow King in the Great Hollow Forest. Although we cannot easily make a judgment without basis, based on the currently known information, it is. Aizen Sasuke nodded and answered. Then does Captain Aizen think it is necessary to completely annihilate the Hollow King in the Great Hollow Forest at all costs? Yamamoto Shinrai Shichikuni asked. Upon hearing this, Aizen Sasuke glanced at Shinra Saibang obscurely. After noticing that Shinra Saibang did not seem to react at all, a little doubt flashed in his eyes, and then he answered in his usual moderate style. I think we need to further test and investigate, and then make a detailed judgment on the degree of threat to determine whether to completely annihilate it at all costs. However, these words undoubtedly sounded more like a statement of support to many hardline captains. I see, I understand Captain Aizen's attitude and meaning. Yamamoto Shinrai Shichikuni nodded, thought for a while, and answered. In that case, the next mission of the Expeditionary Corps will be adjusted immediately. All captains and vice-captains who were at will be recalled, and the focus will be completely on the Great Hollow Forest. After a pause, Yamamoto Shinrai Shichikuni instructed. Before the sages of the Central 46th Room make a decision, please trouble Captain Aizen to confirm as much information as possible about the Great Hollow Forest. Yes, I understand. With Aizen Sosok's response, the emergency communication between the Expeditionary Corps and the Seireitei was cut off. Just as the other vice captains left the meeting tent, Aizen Sosok followed Shinra Wongsai-bang and asked with a gentle smile. "Makao, why do you seem not very welcome to my safe return?" Shinra Wongsai-bang maintained the lukewarm principle that the owner of the source has repeatedly emphasized, seemingly responding gently, but answering in a rather distant and cold tone. Captain Aizen misunderstood. "I'm just worried about the threat from the Great Hollow Forest. I don't have any extra mood," Aizen Sosok said casually after hearing this. "Makao-kun, didn't we agree on this? Why are you calling me so distant in private?" Shinra Wongsai-bang frowned just right, as if expressing some reluctance. "Aizen-kun, do you have any orders? Makao-kun is so unhappy with me, is it because of my statement on the Great Hollow Forest?" Aizen Sosok asked with a curved mouth. "Aizen-kun, what you mean? I don't quite understand." After Shinra Wongsai-bang answered, there was a flash of doubt in his eyes that was completely difficult to fake, which was caught by Aizen Sosok. For a moment, Aizen Sosok doubted his own judgment. That Hollow King in the Great Hollow Forest, is it really not Makao-kun's pawn? And according to the information that Aizen Sosok knew, the Great Hollow King of the Forest Hollow rose more than 50 years ago, and at the time, Senju Makao did not have the opportunity to extend his tentacles into the Hukou Mundo. This gave Aizen Sosok some ideas in his heart, but he pulled out the zanpakutō switchetsu in front of Shinra Wongsai-bang. For Aizen Sosok, the easiest way to verify whether the existence in front of him is the real Senju Makao is undoubtedly through zanpakutō switchetsu. In the world, the only real Makao-kun is the real one that is not affected by zanpakutō switchetsu. Then, Aizen Sosok pointed forward and said with a smile. "Makao-kun, Vice Captain seems to have something to do with you." Shinra Wongsai-bang looked in the direction Aizen Sosok said, and a plump and fat female god of death was walking gracefully. Suddenly, Shinra gave Aizen Sosok a cold look, and said with a hint of helplessness in his tone. "I didn't expect Captain Aizen to like this kind of cold joke." After that, Shinra found an excuse to handle official business, and said goodbye to Aizen Sosok and left. Aizen Sosok, who stayed in the original place, looked at Shinra departing back, and his gentle expression flashed a little doubt, and he murmured. "It's really Makao. In fact, in the moment just now, the hypnotic illusion that Aizen Sosok tried to construct for Shinra reached almost 7 or 8 levels. Exaggerated, subtle, and tangible and intangible, even on the way that Shinra said goodbye and left, Aizen Sosok actually had a hypnotic illusion, but Shinra completely ignored all the illusions. Moreover, even the surrounding dead gods could also see the existence of Shinra and greeted Shinra. This is enough to show that the Senju Makao in front of him is an illusion that is not affected by zanpakutō switchetsu, which also completely shakes the judgment made by Aizen Sosok before. At the same time, Hannibal was taking Synopsis to the place agreed with Senju Makao, and following behind was the mighty and terrifying Cheng-ge hollows. The huge number of them walking in the Hukou Mundo was like waves of rolling white waves surrounding Synopsis. Even Hannibal, who had seen the Cheng-ge hollows of the Hukou Palace, could not help but be shocked. Compared with the hollows of the Hukou Palace, the number of hollows controlled by Synopsis was 3 to 4 times, and there was a kind of order, which was completely different from the chaotic feeling of the hollows of the Hukou Palace. Among them, what shocked Hannibal the most was still the majestic Synopsis in front of him, whose body was as tall as a mountain. This ability is truly terrifying. Standing on the palm of the giant Buddha formed by Synopsis, Hannibal once again looked up at the top of the giant Buddha's head that seemed to be as high as the night sky, and said with emotion. Chapter 323 Dramatic Changes. At this moment, in front of Hannibal, a figure of almost human size emerged from the giant Buddha's palm and answered. "Actually, my original ability was very weak." Hannibal looked at the figure that seemed to be almost the same as a human and asked. "Are you Synopsis?" "Yes." Synopsis waved his hand, and the giant Buddha's palm directly emerged with many things like tables and stools, then motioned Hannibal to sit down, and then answered. "Of course, this is not my real body. I just control part of my body to form this shape so that I can communicate with you. So, can't you separate into countless big hollows at any time?" Hannibal asked in surprise. "Of course, that's impossible." Synopsis, who appeared in a human-like appearance, pointed to his feet that were still connected to the giant Buddha's palm and said. "As a true believer of the Lezan giant Buddha, it's okay to tell you. You can understand that my current state is a special limb of the giant Buddha, but the limb cannot be completely separated from the giant Buddha. Hearing this popular statement, Hilibal instantly understood the limitations and asked. But even so, it is an amazing ability. Just such a supergiant body is already extremely terrifying. At this moment, Synopsis did not maintain the style of the giant Buddha. Instead, he said with some pride, "This is a giant Buddha body that has gathered countless yokais' spiritual power for more than 50 years, and it has also nurtured countless yokais. It is reasonable that it cannot be resisted by a single Vastop-level Great Hollow." "What?" Hilibal asked. "My ability is called False Limbs. Its essence is to transform spiritual power into a substantial spiritual body through consumption. Therefore, with the support of a large number of Achakas, I have been able to create this giant Buddha body in the past 50 years, in addition to being promoted to Vastop." After a pause, Synopsis seemed to be unable to suppress the idea of showing off, and said, "Therefore, this giant Buddha body is the collection of the spiritual power of countless Achakas." Hilibal couldn't help but say after hearing this secret, "Aren't you worried? I just know the name of Lezan Giant Buddha and your name, and you trust me so much." "Of course," Synopsis said with a smile. "In the past, in order to avoid revenge from Seireitei, I hid my real name Synopsis and changed my appearance more than 50 years ago. The only people who know the connection between Synopsis and Lezan Giant Buddha are those I believe in." After a pause, Synopsis said anxiously, "However, how long will it take to reach the agreed location? I can't wait to show the Lezan Giant Buddha what I have achieved in the past 50 years. Soon, the agreed location is." However, before Hilibal could finish, Synopsis, who was maintaining the humanoid communication, frowned visibly and raised his hand to interrupt Hilibal. "Wait, something seems to be wrong." As Synopsis' voice fell, the giant Buddha that was walking in the Hukomunda was tall as a mountain also stopped, and something seemed to be wriggling on the surface of its huge body. "What happened?" Hilibal asked. The next moment, Synopsis spoke, and the humanoid that appeared in front of Hilibal suddenly twisted half of its face, and then formed the appearance of Seireitei, and Seireitei's twisted and crazy voice came out. "Ha ha ha, I see, Synopsis, the little bug that lost its trace more than 50 years ago. I didn't expect you to be the Void King of the Great Void Forest, Seireitei." Synopsis raised one hand and grabbed Seireitei's face tightly, pulling off the flesh of half of his face. However, the next moment, Seireitei's face formed on Synopsis' palm. "Don't bother, Synopsis, don't forget that you were once one of my research materials. I know your abilities better than you do." As Seireitei's voice fell, Seireitei's face appeared one after another on the human form maintained by Synopsis, speaking proudly and madly. "Your biggest mistake was not devouring my spirit just to vent your anger. Don't you think that as a scientist, I wouldn't be on guard against the counterattack of the experimental materials? Damn it, Seireitei!" Synopsis shouted angrily, but Hilibal heard a kind of fear in those words, and Seireitei's voice was still ringing. "What I didn't expect was that, Synopsis, you actually used your own abilities to build this body in more than 50 years. I have to thank you for your gift. This body is even more perfect and majestic than I expected. After being promoted to Vastop, your potential seems to be higher than I ever imagined. Although there is still a difference from the perfect life I imagined. As a weapon, this supergiant body is undoubtedly the most perfect weapon, Synopsis. Hehe, are you still struggling? Give up, Synopsis, I know all your weaknesses and flaws. As long as I find the location of your true body in this body, you will be completely finished." Synopsis experienced the feeling of death approaching and having no way to resist little by little. Hilibal listened to the voice of Seireitei that seemed to be getting more and more crazy and proud, but his expression froze. This situation was almost completely beyond Hilibal's original expectations. At this time, Synopsis' trembling voice sounded and said, "Seireitei, that kind of ineffective verbal stimulation is useless. Do you think I will take the initiative to expose my position?" Hilibal. "Go quickly, Before Synopsis finished speaking, the voice was suddenly interrupted, and the human figure that appeared in front of Hilibal suddenly collapsed, which seemed to indicate that Synopsis' control over the giant Buddha's body seemed to be greatly reduced. Seeing this, Hilibal no longer hesitated, and his figure quickly shot out from the giant Buddha's palm towards the distance. However, the next moment, the giant Buddha, who seemed to be wriggling and struggling all over, stretched out a huge palm that covered the sky of the sun in the direction of Hilibal. At such a distance, and the huge range of the giant Buddha, made Hilibal's pupils shrink. At this moment, Hannibal deeply felt the despair of Seireitei, who seemed to be lightly slapped to death and swallowed by the giant Buddha's palm. That palm that covered the sky and the sun seemed to have nowhere to escape except for hard blocking. Chapter 324 Faith. At this moment, when the shadow was about to completely cover Hannibal, boom! The other palm of the giant Buddha slapped from the side, and the collision of the two palms was almost like two mountains colliding together. The huge storm generated by the collision of that moment directly lifted Hannibal away. Hannibal did not dare to stay for a moment. After stabilizing his body in midair, he quickly flew away again. Behind Hannibal, the giant Buddha seemed to be self-contradictory and conflicting, and kept making huge explosions and air waves. Until Hannibal completely disappeared from the end of his sight, the movement of the giant Buddha gradually calmed down, until it was completely silent like a huge mountain range across the desert. But the huge giant Buddha's body surface was still full of creeping protrusions, as if countless tentacles were wandering inside the giant Buddha's body searching for something. After a long time, when the giant Buddha opened his eyes again, he was no longer the perfect mercy and majesty that he had disguised, but instead revealed madness and complacency. Are you still trying to struggle? What obsession is keeping you going, Synopsis? Let me look through your memory and see how that little reptile has changed to this extent. Rotten wood, god of death, and giant Buddha. How stupid. You actually admire a mere god of death to that extent, even regarding it as a belief, and are willing to give everything for him. In the process of deceiving the other Cheng-ge for more than 50 years, you have hypnotized yourself deeply, to the point that it has completely become the obsession that supports your evolution into Vastod. An idea called faith. It's really more ridiculous than Hannibal's sacrifice, Synopsis. And when the giant Buddha, who kept whispering, said this, his eyes, like two bright suns, flickered, as if something was struggling. But soon, the eyes returned to the madness of Seireitei, and whispered, Synopsis, let me destroy your faith bit by bit, with the power you personally accumulated. As Seireitei's voice fell, his eyes slowly looked at the seemingly endless wave of Cheng-ge's hollows behind him. At the same time, the speed of the construction of the Night Palace is beyond imagination. Under the business of Cheng-ge and Killian, the Night Palace, which is the same as the original track, soon built an outline. However, the sky canopy of the Night Palace in the original track has not yet begun to be built, so Senju Cheng, who was standing at the highest tower of the Night Palace, still sees the dark and endless night sky when he looks up. Of course, Senju Cheng is not just posing here to blow the cold wind, but his main purpose is for Ulkira, who just landed on the other side of the tower. When the framework of this high tower was just built, Senju noticed that Ulkira, who looked like a demon, had a habit of standing still in high places. The so-called chance encounter was often just a small trick planned in advance. After several chance encounters, Ulkira had become accustomed to the appearance of Senju. There was another moment of silence between the two sides. Senju and Ulkira, standing back to back in the same high tower, were like a black and a white shadow. Finally, Senju, who felt that the foreplay was almost brewing, spoke to Ulkira for the first time. Xiao, why did you choose to follow Wazen? Ulkira was silent for a moment, as if he was a little surprised by the name Senju said, and then answered in a unique cold and calm voice. Are you curious about this kind of thing, Lord Ashwara? Because I feel that Xiao is different from other hollows. Senju replied. Ulkira replied with a cold and indifferent look. It's because of the soul. I don't have any soul, and I don't have any extra emotions. No, on the contrary, I think Xiao is pursuing the true soul, so I can truly feel the emptiness and nothingness of the soul, Senju said with some emotion. Ulkira's expression remained indifferent when he heard this, and his dark green eyes reflected the seemingly endless lonely night of Huko Mundo. Senju, who had his back to Ulkira, didn't mind how much use this hope could play. While Aizen Sosok was not at home, he continued. Xiao, if you want to pursue the true soul, you can't do it without taking action. As Senju said this, he turned around and walked behind Ulkira. His eyes subconsciously fell on the hollow hole in Ulkira's heart, and inexplicably had an urge to reach in and fill it up. However, considering that this behavior was not polite and might offend Ulkira, Senju only spoke. If you want to fill the hollow, you must stuff something in it. If you want to find that true soul, you must try something you have never touched before. After a pause, Senju continued. For example, how about Seireitei? I have recently found some clues about the research on Seireitei, which may help you to do it. Don't worry, you'll stay awake throughout the whole process. Apart from a small amount of bleeding, the overall feeling should be quite comfortable. It must be said that Makatao Senju's calculations were probably heard clearly by all the people in the expeditionary camp. Makatao Senju's series of actions of poaching and planting seeds were done in one go. What disappointed Makatao Senju was that Ukira did not agree on the spot, but only expressed some gratitude to Makatao Senju, and then left the tower. In this regard, Makatao Senju, who watched Ukira leave, was not anxious at all. As the saying goes, fine needles produce good work. Try poking Ukira occasionally, and there will always be a chance that the seeds can be sown legitimately. What's more, just like Raisin Sosok tried to monitor Senju Makatao in the Expeditionary Corps camp through his own means, Senju Makatao was also monitoring Raisin Sosok. After all, with Senju Makatao's character, how could he really hand over another body to Shinigami without leaving any backup? For Senju Makatao, he only needs to hide a part of the ultimate spirit in the heart of the spirit used by Shinigami, so as to keep monitoring Shinigami's every move at all times and prevent Shinigami from doing anything outrageous that cannot be countered. Thinking of this, Senju Makatao inexplicably felt that he and Aizen Sosok were stealing each other's home. Aizen Sosok stayed in the Expeditionary Corps camp to food the Seireitei, and he became the high-level executive of the Kainiac who was free to poach people. Chapter 325. I'll be back soon, and Shinigami did not disappoint Senju Makatao's expectations. In Senju Makatao's judgment, Shinigami has undoubtedly fully confused Aizen Sosok. The only thing that makes Senju Makatao a little helpless is that Shinigami seems to have no sense of margin in treating his Maneo. That's my body, don't let others misunderstand something serious in front of my face. Otherwise, Senju Makatao is very doubtful that he will explain at the time that it's not that I completely lost myself outside, it's just that my own zanpakutō is crazy to send assists, and I don't know if Unohana teacher can believe this statement. Of course, the overall situation of Hukomundo at present, with the plan originally estimated by Senju Makatao, is undoubtedly gradually becoming clear. He nestled in Aizen Sosok's Huko Night Palace, secretly integrating a large number of 10 blades and achikes into the seeds, taking the opportunity to accelerate the speed of accumulating spiritual power, and by the way, try to turn the other party's thoughts into his own shape. After all, according to Senju Makatao's estimation, if he wants to completely complete his ultimate spirit body, the spiritual power accumulated so far is still far from enough. Therefore, on the first day of entering Hukomundo, it is impossible for Senju Makatao to have no idea about the large groups of hollows in Hukomundo. It's just that Senju Makatao has never been able to find a perfect time to cut in and sow seeds, so in order not to waste any seeds, he has not taken action. After all, in the special environment of Hukomundo, even the large hollows of the level of achukas are often in danger. If Senju Makatao just sowed seeds for those achukas in the morning, and those achukas were eaten up by other people's hollows in the desert in the evening, wouldn't that be a pure waste? Therefore, no matter what time, a stable situation is the prerequisite for sowing. The current situation of the Hukomundo Palace has undoubtedly made Senju Makatao a little restless. If the situation of the so-called Great Hollow Forest Hollow King had not been completely clarified, and it had not been confirmed whether it was a smoke bomb by Aizen Sosok, Senju Makatao would have started to act long ago. Therefore, Senju Makatao is still waiting patiently, waiting for Aizen Sosok to summon all the captains and vice-captains of the expeditionary force according to the order of the Seireitei. By then, even Tosen Kaname and Ichimura will have left the Kainiaku Palace. Senju Makatao can play as much as he wants, but he still has the final say. At this moment, a white after-image passed by and landed in front of Senju Makatao. Lulu ha! Nell's innocent and sweet laughter sounded, and then the whole person started super acceleration from Grimchow's back and crashed into Senju Makatao's arms. Nell rubbed Senju Makatao intimately and dependently, and then said, "Father, is today's quiet time over? Let's play with Nell." Nell just found a very interesting hole. Listening to Nell's constant sharing of her innocence, Senju Makatao seemed to be infected and smiled gently, saying with some hesitation, "Nell, if I can restore you to your original appearance, do you want to restore it?" Original appearance? Nell raised her round eyes and looked at Senju Makatao with confusion. It means growing up. If Nell is willing, I can make Nell grow up quickly. Then, Senju Makatao explained it to Nell in words that Nell could understand at this stage. Moreover, the recovery that Senju Makatao said is essentially the treatment that Senju Makatao is best at. During this period of time, Senju Makatao has been studying Nell's spirit continuously, and Nell's spirit is almost no longer a secret to Senju Makatao. the traces left by the autonomous Seireitei process, the organizational structure of Vastod, and the reason why Nell degenerated directly from a mature woman to a lullator in both appearance and thinking. Listening to Senju Makoto's seemingly serious question, Nailu bit her finger and seemed to think seriously, then asked seriously. Father, after I grow up, can I still be held by you like this every day? Senju Makoto. This kind of thing can actually be a reason for hesitation. However, Senju Makoto couldn't help but think of Nailu's breathtaking figure in the form of a queen. After I grow up, it's too big, it's not convenient to hold me. Senju Makoto said earnestly. So? Can't I kiss and lift you up? Nailu seemed to be completely shocked and asked impatiently. What about eating the noodles that father ordered? Senju Makoto shook his head and said bluntly. The bottom is okay, but the rest is not okay. No. However, when Nailu heard this, she hugged Senju Makoto tightly without hesitation, buried her head completely in it, and said in a puffy voice. Then Nell will not grow up, and will always be kissed, hugged and held high by father. Hearing these childish words, Senju Makoto smiled knowingly, but in his heart he also silently decided to help Nell recover before leaving Hukomundo. At most, just leave something like a switch so that Nell can switch back and forth between the lily and mature forms. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous to let Nell in the lily form survive alone in Hukomundo. Thinking of this, Senju Makoto, who was holding Nell, looked at Grimmjow and said, Grimmjow, when you take Nell out to play, remember to take care of Nell more. Who takes care of whom? Grimmjow, who felt aggrieved, almost subconsciously thought of a sarcastic remark in his heart. As a leopard that was humiliated by Nell as a mount for a long time, Grimmjow felt that his dignity as the Leopard King was being trampled on. Grimmjow, who was about to object subconsciously, looked up and saw Senju Makoto's gentle and calm eyes, and Nell's innocent smile at him. Yes. In the end, Grimmjow responded in a low voice, and then secretly vowed in his heart that he would devour Nell sooner or later. However, after Grimmjow responded, he did not wait for Senju Makoto's approval and encouragement. When he looked up, he found that Senju Makoto's eyes seemed to be looking at a distant direction. Why did Haribel and Synopsis separate? Senju Makoto murmured in a low voice, and inexplicably became a little wary of this unexpected situation. According to the plan that Senju Makoto told Haribel, this kind of separation in the middle of the journey should almost never occur, unless they were attacked. So one side was left behind, and the other side fled to the agreed location. Thinking of this, Senju Makoto thought for a while and decided to confirm the specific situation. Then, Senju Makoto held Nell and put her back on Grimmjow's back with both hands, and then said, Nell, go play with Grimmjow first. I'll be gone for a moment and we'll be back soon. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.